Welcome to Tales by Imon. Settle in and let the story begin. The hum was the first thing you noticed, and the last thing you forgot. It was a constant low-frequency thrum that vibrated deep in your bones, the collective breath of thousands of servers processing the invisible lifeblood of the modern world. For Jack Carter, it was the soundtrack to his life. For 3 years, he had spent his nights bathed in the cold blue glow of monitors in the subterranean heart of Ethelred Security's data fortress. His official title was Nocturnal Oversight Analyst. In simpler terms, he was a night watchman for data, a digital ghost haunting the graveyard shift. His world was a grid of camera feeds, 16 squares of silent, sterile reality displayed on a massive screen. Server Room 3B, Corridor 7 Alpha, Power Conduit Junction 9. Each location was impeccably clean, brutally functional, and utterly devoid of life, save for the occasional skittering maintenance drone. Jack's job was to watch for aberrations, a flicker of heat where there should be none, a door ajar, a wisp of smoke. It was a job that demanded meticulous attention to detail, a trait Jack possessed in spades. It was also, 99.9% of the time, profoundly boring. Tonight was no different. The city above slept under a blanket of rain, but down here in the climate-controlled stillness, it was always the same. Jack took a slow sip of his lukewarm coffee, the bitter taste a familiar companion in the lonely hours before dawn. His eyes scanned the grid, a dance he had performed thousands of times. Left to right, top to bottom. Nothing. The servers hummed their eternal song. The LED status lights blinked in hypnotic synchronicity. He was halfway through his 5th scan of the night when it happened. It was on camera 12, focused on the main aisle of server room 4C. For a single frame, maybe less, the image stuttered. It wasn't a glitch, not the kind he was used to, the pixelated blocks of data loss or the momentary freeze of a lagging connection. This was something else. It was a flicker, a seamless, instantaneous replacement of the image. One moment, the pristine, white-tiled floor was reflecting the cool blue lights of the server racks. The next, for an almost imperceptible instant, it was dark, grimy, and broken. Jack blinked, leaning forward in his ergonomic chair, the worn leather groaning in protest. He rewound the feed, his fingers flying across the console. He played it back at normal speed. Nothing. He played it again at half speed. Still nothing. His eyes were playing tricks on him. It had to be fatigue, the coffee failing to keep the tendrils of sleep at bay. He was about to dismiss it, to log it as a momentary hardware hiccup and move on. But Jack wasn't the kind of person to let things go. It was the very quality that made him so good at his monotonous job. His curiosity was a persistent itch. He isolated the exact time code, 3:33 and 17 seconds AM. He magnified the playback window and began to advance the footage frame by agonizing frame. Frame 20. Normal. The polished floor gleamed. Frame 21. Normal. The blinking green light of server rack 4C7 was perfectly clear. Frame 22. There. The world lurched. The image on his screen was completely wrong. The gleaming white floor was now cracked concrete, coated in a thick layer of dust and grime. The server racks, usually humming with quiet efficiency, were silent and dark. One of them, 4C7, was tipped over, its side panel ripped open, exposing a tangle of dead wires like metallic viscera. Cobwebs, thick and ancient, draped over the machinery. The air itself seemed heavy, stagnant. And on the far wall, a dark, rust-colored stain marred the concrete, something that looked disturbingly like a dried splatter. Frame 23. Normal again. The pristine server room was back, humming along as if nothing had ever happened. Jack's breath hitched in his throat. He felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He played the 2 frames back and forth. Frame 22. Frame 23. Decay and ruin. Pristine order. Desolation. Perfection. It was impossible. A single frame of video, lasting less than a 30th of a second, showed a vision of the same room, but decades into a derelict future. His first thought was a prank. A sophisticated hack. One of the daytime tech wizards having a laugh at the night guy's expense. He immediately ran a system integrity check, his fingers dancing over the keyboard, pulling up diagnostic after diagnostic. He checked the camera's firmware, the network connection, the recording server's data logs. Everything was green. No unauthorized access. No data corruption. No packet loss. According to Ethelred's multi-million-dollar security system, the footage was 100% authentic. Nothing had happened, but he had seen it. It was burned into his retinas. The image of decay. He stood up and walked around his console, a nervous energy coursing through him. The hum of the servers, once a comforting lullaby, now seemed to throb with a menacing undertone. He was alone, 5 stories beneath the ground, in a facility that represented the pinnacle of order and logic. And he had just witnessed something that defied all logic. Was he going crazy? Was this the beginning of a breakdown, brought on by years of social isolation and reversed sleep cycles? The thought terrified him more than any ghost in the machine. He gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles turning white. He had to be rational. There had to be an explanation. He returned to the screen, his mind racing. He exported the single anomalous frame, saving it as a high-resolution image file. He zoomed in, enhancing the pixels until the image started to break down. The details were frighteningly real. The texture of the dust, the specific way the wires were frayed on the fallen server, the pattern of the cracks in the floor. This wasn't a CGI overlay. It was too perfect, too detailed. It looked real. It looked like a photograph of a real place. He pulled up the live feed from camera 12. Server room 4C was just as it should be, quiet and orderly. The polished floor reflected the blinking lights. Rack 4C, 7 stood tall and silent. There was no dust, no decay, no ominous stain on the wall. It was the picture of normalcy. But Jack knew better. The normal was a lie. Or at least, it wasn't the whole truth. He looked at the anomalous image again. It wasn't just a different room. The camera angle, the position of the racks, the layout, it was all identical. It was server room 4C. He could see the faint outline of the stenciled label on the floor, just beneath a layer of grime. It was a glimpse of the future. A dark, dead future. A shiver, completely unrelated to the room's chilly temperature, traced its way down his spine. This was no longer about a technical glitch or a corporate prank. This was something else entirely. Something that shouldn't be possible. He had stumbled upon something he wasn't meant to see. A crack in the fabric of time, captured by the unblinking eye of a security camera. He knew he had to report it. That was protocol. Log the anomaly, flag it for the senior analysts, and let them deal with it in the morning. They would probably laugh, dismiss it as a freak data error, and tell him to get more sleep. They would wipe the file and restore the backup. The anomaly would be gone, erased, forgotten. But Jack couldn't do it. The image haunted him. The overturned server, the silent darkness. It felt like a warning, a premonition. Deleting it felt like closing his eyes to an approaching tidal wave. With a resolve he didn't know he possessed, he made a decision. He copied the original video segment, the few seconds surrounding the flicker, and the isolated high-resolution frame onto a secured, encrypted flash drive he kept for personal emergencies. He slipped the drive into his pocket. It felt heavy, like a stone. He then logged a low-priority maintenance ticket for camera 12, citing brief image distortion, possible refresh rate issue. It was a lie, a piece of digital camouflage to cover his tracks and explain the time he spent analyzing the feed. It was a risk, but it was better than the alternative. As the first hints of dawn began to break in the world above, Jack sat back in his chair, staring at the grid of 16 silent rooms. Everything looked the same, but for him, everything had changed. The monotonous hum of the data center no longer sounded like a lullaby. It sounded like a countdown. And he had the terrifying feeling that he was the only one who could hear it. The anomaly on the security footage wasn't just a glitch in the system. It was a glimpse of an ending. And it was just the beginning. The transition from the artificial, refrigerated night of the data center to the humid, gray morning of the real world was always jarring. As Jack stepped out of the Ethelred building, the city sounds washed over him. The hiss of bus brakes, the distant wail of a siren, the murmur of early commuters. Usually, this sensory flood was a relief, a sign that his solitary confinement was over. Today, it felt like an assault. Every reflective window seemed to hide a pair of watching eyes. Every security camera mounted on a traffic light or the corner of a building felt like an extension of his own control room, its unblinking lens aimed directly at him. He shoved his hands in his pockets, his right hand closing around the small, cool metal of the encrypted flash drive. It felt less like a stone now and more like a live grenade. His drive home was a blur of traffic and anxiety. He lived in a small, unassuming apartment 30 minutes from the downtown core, a place that had always been his sanctuary. Now, as he unlocked his front door, it felt like a fishbowl. He drew the blinds, plunging the living room into a dim twilight that did little to soothe his frayed nerves. Sleep was a distant, impossible dream. His mind was a high-speed loop of a single, horrifying frame of video. After a long, hot shower that failed to wash away the feeling of dread, he sat down at his personal computer. The machine was his hobby, a custom-built rig far more powerful than the standard issue console he used at work. With trembling hands, he plugged in the flash drive. The file directory appeared on the screen, one video clip, one image file. He clicked on the image. There it was again. Server room 4C, but not his 4C. A ruined, derelict version. In the clear light of his own apartment, on his own high-resolution monitor, the image was even more terrifying. He could make out details he'd missed before. A faint layer of what looked like frost or crystallization on some of the exposed wiring. The specific model number on an overturned power supply unit, a model that wasn't scheduled for rollout for another 2 years. His heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't just a random image of a dilapidated room. The evidence was mounting, pointing toward an impossible but unavoidable conclusion. He was looking at the future. His phone buzzed on the desk, the sharp vibration making him jump. The caller ID read, Marcus Henderson. His supervisor. Jack's blood ran cold. He took a deep breath and answered, trying to keep his voice level. Carter. Jack. Henderson here. His boss's voice was clipped and impatient, as always. I'm looking at your maintenance ticket for camera 12 in 4C. Image distortion? Can you be more specific? Diagnostics are showing 100% uptime and data integrity. Morning, Marcus, Jack said, forcing a casual tone. Yeah, it was probably nothing. Just a momentary flicker on my end. Figured I should log it, just in case. Better safe than sorry. There was a sigh on the other end of the line. It was a sound Jack knew well, the sigh of a man who believed his subordinates were either idiots or children. Carter, we have over 5,000 cameras in this facility. If you log a ticket for every time you think you see a flicker, my maintenance team will be chasing ghosts until the end of time. Don't waste our resources on screen fatigue. Close the ticket. And get some sleep, you sound terrible. The line went dead before Jack could respond. He stared at his phone, a slow burn of anger mixing with his fear. He thinks I'm crazy. The thought was both infuriating and validating. Henderson's dismissiveness was exactly what he had expected. It confirmed his decision. He was on his own with this. Reporting it further up the chain would get him nothing but a dismissive memo and maybe a mandatory psychological evaluation. He had to find out what was happening in server room 4C. What was so special about it? At work, he only had access to operational data, camera feeds, temperature logs, power consumption. The why of it all, the actual projects running on the servers, was compartmentalized and far above his pay grade. Trying to access that information through the Ethelred network from his home computer would be monumentally stupid, a digital tripwire that would bring the company's formidable cybersecurity team down on him in minutes. He needed a different approach. He started with the basics, using publicly available search engines. He searched for Ethelred security and any projects associated with their data centers. Most of it was corporate PR, cloud storage solutions, enterprise security platforms. Boring. But then he remembered the server model number, the one that shouldn't exist yet. He ran a search for it, along with the manufacturer's name. He hit a wall. The model didn't exist in any public catalog. It was unannounced, unreleased. But he did find a few heavily redacted Ethelred procurement contracts filed with a federal technology board. One of them mentioned a high-density computing initiative, a pilot program located in their central data fortress. The project's internal code name was listed. Project Chimera. Chimera. In mythology, a creature made of parts from different animals, a monstrous hybrid. The name sent another unwelcome shiver down his spine. What kind of project would warrant such a name? He tried searching for Project Chimera directly, but the digital trail went cold. It was clearly a highly classified internal project. All he knew was that it involved next-generation hardware and it was housed, at least in part, in the same area as Camera 12. Frustrated, Jack turned his attention back to the evidence. He had the image. What else did he have? The video clip. He hadn't really focused on it, his mind fixated on the single anomalous frame. He opened the clip in a professional editing suite he used for his own hobbies. It was only 5 seconds long. He played it. Normal, flicker, normal. He put on his noise-canceling headphones and played it again, this time focusing on the audio track. The audio from the server rooms was usually just the low, monotonous hum of the cooling fans and electronics. The microphones were there to detect anomalies in sound, the pop of a failing capacitor or the whine of a malfunctioning fan. During the 4 seconds of normal footage, that's all he heard, the familiar, steady hum. But in the fraction of a second that frame 22 was on screen, there was another sound. It was buried deep in the mix, almost completely masked by the server noise. It was a sharp, static-filled burst. A digital cough. Henderson would have called it data corruption on the audio stream and closed the ticket. But Jack wasn't Henderson. He isolated the tiny audio fragment, the sound that existed only within the moment of the anomaly. He amplified it, filtering out the low-frequency hum of the servers. He ran it through a series of noise reduction filters, peeling back the layers of static. What was left was faint, distorted, and utterly chilling. It wasn't just static. Beneath the digital noise, there was something else. It was rhythmic, structured. It sounded almost like a voice, stretched and warped through a meat grinder of interference. He couldn't make out words, but there was a cadence, a desperate rising inflection that made the hair on his arms stand up. It sounded like a scream, digitized and broken into a million pieces. He leaned back, his headphones still clamped over his ears, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had found another piece of the puzzle. An impossible image of the future, and now, an impossible sound accompanying it. A ghost in the machine that wasn't just showing him a dead future, it was screaming from it. And Jack knew, with a terrifying certainty, that he had to find out what it was saying. Sleep offered no escape. When Jack finally succumbed to exhaustion, his dreams were a chaotic slideshow of digital decay and static-filled screams. He would wake up with a jolt, the ghost of that distorted voice still echoing in his ears, his heart pounding a frantic drum solo against his ribs. For 2 days, he lived in a paranoid twilight, fueled by caffeine and fear. The audio fragment had become his obsession. He ran it through every piece of software he owned, applying dozens of filters, equalizers, and spectral analyzers. He would isolate a millisecond of sound, convinced he was on the verge of understanding, only for it to dissolve back into meaningless noise. The voice was there, he knew it was, trapped like a fossil in a layer of digital rock, but he didn't have the right tools to excavate it. He was an analyst, a man who dealt in patterns and clear data. This distorted, ephemeral sound was beyond his expertise, and the frustration was eating him alive. He was hitting a wall, and he knew that trying to break through it alone would either drive him mad or get him caught. He needed help. The name that surfaced from the fog of his memory was Leo Martinez. They had been roommates in college, two sides of the same tech-obsessed coin. While Jack had pursued a stable corporate career path at Ethelred, Leo had veered into the unpredictable world of freelance audio engineering. He was a genius with sound, a digital archaeologist who could reconstruct audio from the most corrupted files. More importantly, Leo possessed a deep-seated, almost gleeful distrust of large corporations and government entities. He wouldn't just believe Jack's story, he would probably revel in it. Reaching out was a risk. Jack's paranoia had grown tentacles, wrapping around every aspect of his life. He was convinced his phone was bugged and his home network was being monitored. He dug out an old prepaid burner phone he kept in a drawer for emergencies and drove to a public library several towns over. Using their public Wi-Fi, he sent Leo a message on an encrypted messaging app they hadn't used in years. The message was simple: need your ears. Not a joke. Meet me at the old spot tomorrow, 4 p.m. The old spot was a noisy, crowded food court in a downtown mall, a place where two people talking would be instantly lost in the cacophony of 100 other conversations. It was the perfect place to be invisible. Leo's reply came back in under a minute. You buy the pizza. I'll bring the magic. The next 24 hours were the longest of Jack's life. His anxiety was amplified when he received an automated email from Ethelred Human Resources. The subject line was bland: updated employee network policy. He almost deleted it, but his curiosity got the better of him. The email detailed a routine update, with a new clause highlighted in bold. It stated that all data transfers from the Ethelred network to external storage devices would now be subject to additional layers of automated content scanning and flagged for manual review if they met certain criteria. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. It was probably a coincidence, a standard corporate policy update that had been in the works for months. But it felt like a spotlight swinging in his direction. They knew, or they would know soon enough. He had gotten the data out just in time. The grenade in his pocket suddenly felt like it was about to detonate. The food court was a chaotic symphony of noise when Jack arrived. He found an isolated booth in the corner, his back to the wall, and waited. A few minutes later, Leo slid into the seat opposite him. He looked much the same as he had in college: sharp, intelligent eyes, a cynical smirk, and a t-shirt for a band Jack had never heard of. Carter, Leo said, leaning back. You look like you've seen a ghost. And judging by your super spy message, maybe you have. So, what's so important that you couldn't just call me? Jack didn't waste time. In low, urgent tones, he laid out the entire story. The graveyard shift, the flicker on the screen, the impossible frame of a derelict future. He pulled out his own phone to show Leo the image. Leo leaned in, his smirk fading as he zoomed in on the details. He was silent for a long moment. Okay, Leo said finally, his voice serious. That's weird. Very weird. Could be an elaborate hoax, a deep fake. It's not, Jack insisted. The system logs are clean. The data is authentic. And there's more. Jack slid the encrypted flash drive across the sticky table. There's an audio file. Just a fraction of a second. It's tied to that exact frame. I think there's a voice in it, but it's buried in static. Leo's eyes lit up with professional curiosity. This was a challenge. A puzzle. He took the drive. A ghost in the static, huh? That's my specialty. Give me a few hours. I'll call you on the secure app. He stood up, then paused. Hey Jack, be careful. This feels different. This isn't just some corporate prank. With that, he disappeared into the crowd, leaving Jack alone with a half-eaten slice of pizza and a stomach twisted in knots. Jack spent the next 3 hours pacing his apartment, unable to sit still. Every creak of the floorboards, every car that drove by, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through him. When his phone finally buzzed with the secure app's unique notification tone, he snatched it up. It was a call from Leo. Jack, Leo's voice said, stripped of all its earlier sarcasm. He sounded strained, shaken. Did you find anything? Jack asked, his own voice barely a whisper. Oh, I found something, Leo replied. It took every trick in my book. Spectral denoising, phase cancellation, harmonic reconstruction. It was buried deep, Jack. But it's there. It's not a scream. What is it? There was a pause, and Jack could hear the faint sound of Leo taking a deep breath. It's a voice. A woman's voice. She's panicked, talking fast. And she's not just saying words. It's a sequence. Leo sent a text file through the app. Jack opened it, his hands shaking. The text was short, but it hit him like a physical blow. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. Warning. Chimera compromised. It's not. The audio cuts off there, Leo said softly over the call. The signal just ends. Jack, what the hell is this? What is Project Chimera? Jack stared at the numbers, his mind reeling. They were random, meaningless. A warning. The project's name confirmed. And then an incomplete, terrifying phrase. It's not. It's not what? Not working. Not safe. Not human. The anomaly wasn't just a passive glimpse of a dead future. It was an active message, a desperate SOS sent from a moment of crisis. And he was the only one who had received it. The numbers were a key, he was sure of it. But to what lock? And what terrifying door would it open? The numbers stared back at Jack from his phone screen, a cryptic, meaningless sequence that held the weight of the world. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. On the other end of the secure line, Leo was quiet for a moment before speaking, his voice low and serious. Look, Jack. I cleaned up the audio. That was the challenge. But this is something else. Numbers, warnings, compromised secret projects. This is out of my league. My advice, as your friend? Delete it all. Burn the drive. Forget you ever saw anything. These corporate giants don't play games. I can't, Leo, Jack said, his voice barely a whisper. Don't you see? It was a warning. Someone, or something, was trying to get a message out. If I ignore it. If you don't ignore it, you could end up as a ghost in someone else's security footage, Leo retorted sharply. I'm out, man. I've deleted my copy of the file. I never saw it. I'm telling you this for your own good. Be careful. The line went dead. The silence that followed was heavier than any of the noise that had preceded it. Leo was right to be scared. Every rational part of Jack's brain was screaming at him to listen, to walk away. But the image of the derelict server room and the memory of that panicked voice were branded into his mind. He was already involved. Walking away now felt like a betrayal of the unknown woman who had sent her desperate, fragmented message through time. He had to understand the numbers. He spent the next day in a feverish haze of research, treating the sequence as a complex cryptographic puzzle. He was an analyst, and this was just data. Data could be cracked. First, he explored the most obvious possibilities. Were they dates? He tried every conceivable format: month, day, year, Julian dates, time codes. Nothing matched any significant event in Ethelred's history or any known technological milestone. A dead end. Next, he considered them as geographical coordinates. He plotted them in various combinations of latitude and longitude. The most likely combination pointed to a desolate, empty patch of the South Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from any landmass. It felt like a red herring, a digital wild goose chase. The hours bled together. He was running on fumes, his apartment littered with empty coffee cups and discarded notebooks filled with frantic scribbles. The solution remained stubbornly out of reach, a locked door with no visible keyhole. He knew he would have to go back to work for his next shift, to sit at his console and pretend that everything was normal. The thought filled him with a profound sense of dread. Stepping back into the subterranean cold of the Ethelred data fortress felt like entering a cage. The familiar hum of the servers now sounded like a low growl. Jack settled into his chair, his eyes scanning the 16 camera feeds with a new, heightened sense of anxiety. His gaze kept drifting to camera 12, showing the serene, orderly state of server room 4C. It was a mask, hiding a terrible secret. Halfway through his shift, a notification popped up on his console's work order screen. It was flagged as high priority. Jack's heart leaped into his throat as he read the description: urgent, unscheduled level 3 diagnostic and hardware purge. Location: server racks 4C, 5 through 4C, 9. All data to be deep wiped. Physical components to be prepped for incineration. They were scrubbing it. The exact location of the anomaly. It couldn't be a coincidence. The timing was too perfect. They weren't just running a check, they were erasing everything, data and hardware alike. It was a digital book burning. Whatever Project Chimera was, Ethelred was trying to bury it. A wave of panic washed over Jack. He was running out of time. The evidence, the source of the anomaly, was about to be physically destroyed. Staring at the network schematics on one of his secondary monitors, a desperate idea began to form. He had been thinking about the numbers in a real-world context, dates, coordinates. But what if their meaning was tied to this place? To Ethelred's own internal structure? His mind raced, pulling up fragments of information he'd learned during his initial training. Ethelred's network was a labyrinth. While the active servers used a complex hexadecimal addressing system, he remembered his trainer mentioning the old deep archives. It was a digital graveyard where data from decommissioned projects was stored, locked away in virtual vaults. Those archives used an older, simpler, purely numerical addressing protocol. A 6-part sequence. A jolt went through him, so powerful it was like an electric shock. 6 numbers. He pulled up the old protocol documentation from the internal knowledge base. The address structure was clear. Sector, subdirectory, archive unit, data block, file set, version. He looked at the numbers on his phone. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. They fit. They fit perfectly. It wasn't a date or a location on a map. It was a library card number for a book in a forgotten, locked section of Ethelred's digital catacombs. It was the address of a file. His hands shook as he opened a command line interface on his terminal. Accessing the deep archive directly was far beyond his security clearance. A direct access attempt would trigger every alarm in the building. But he didn't need to access it, not yet. He just needed to know if it was real. He could run a ping, a simple existence query. It was the digital equivalent of shouting down a dark hallway to see if anyone was there. It was still risky, a low-level command that could be logged, but it was a risk he had to take. He typed the command, structuring the 6 numbers into the archive address format. His finger hovered over the enter key. This was the point of no return. He pressed it. The system paused for a heartbeat. Then, a single line of text appeared. Query acknowledged. Archive 4.8.15.16.23.42 exists. Project designation, Project Chimera, Subject 0, log files, decommissioned. Jack's breath caught in his lungs. Subject 0. It wasn't just a project about hardware. It was about a subject. A person. An animal. The implications were horrifying. He stared at the screen, his mind trying to process the revelation. He had found it. The source. Before he could even form his next thought, a small, triangular icon in the bottom right corner of his monitor, an icon that had been dormant green for his entire 3-year career, began to flash a violent, pulsing red. A text box materialized over his screen, stark and impossible to ignore. Security anomaly detected in network query. User ID 774, J. Carter. Please remain at your station. A supervisor has been dispatched to your location. Time seemed to warp, slowing to a thick, syrupy crawl. The red icon pulsed on Jack's screen, a malevolent digital heartbeat counting down the final seconds of his career, and possibly his freedom. The message, sterile and corporate, was an executioner's decree. A supervisor has been dispatched. He could hear the sharp, determined footsteps echoing down the corridor. Henderson. Panic, cold and sharp, threatened to paralyze him. He could run. He could wipe his console. But it was too late. The query was logged on a dozen different servers, his digital fingerprints all over the breach. Running would be an admission of guilt. He wasn't a spy or a hacker, he was an analyst. And his only way out was to analyze. With a surge of adrenaline, he forced his trembling fingers to move. He had maybe 30 seconds. He couldn't erase the query, but he could muddy the waters. He rapidly opened 4 different terminal windows, populating them with network diagnostic commands. He ran latency checks, packet loss simulations, and a trace route to the facility's oldest servers. He filled his screens with cascading lines of code and scrolling data, creating the digital equivalent of a magician's smoke bomb. He was no longer a man looking at a single forbidden file. He was an analyst drowning in complex, albeit meaningless, data. He was building his alibi. The door to the control room hissed open. Marcus Henderson stood there, his face a thunderous mask of fury. Flanking him was a burly, stone-faced security guard from the surface level, a man Jack had only ever seen on camera feeds. The guard's presence turned the situation from a workplace reprimand into a criminal interrogation. "Carter, what in the hell do you think you're doing?" Henderson's voice cut through the low hum of the servers. He marched over to the console, his eyes scanning the flashing red alert. "Pinging the deep archive? Are you out of your mind? That is a Tier 1 restricted zone. You don't have the clearance. You don't have anything close to the clearance." Jack took a slow breath, forcing a mask of weary diligence onto his face. He gestured to the chaotic mess of data on his screens. "I was running a diagnostic, Marcus." "A diagnostic?" Henderson's voice dripped with sarcasm. "That query set off a silent alarm that goes directly to my desk and the head of cybersecurity. That's not a diagnostic, that's a breach." "It's connected to the maintenance ticket I filed for Camera 12, Jack said, his voice steady, reciting the lie he had constructed in the span of a heartbeat. "The one you told me to close." He pointed to the camera feed of server room 4C. "The image distortion I saw was a temporal data lag, a flicker. I ran every standard check, and nothing showed up. My hypothesis was that the issue wasn't with the camera or the immediate network, but with the legacy infrastructure it's built on. I theorized that a query call to an archaic address format, like those used in the deep archive, could create a momentary data bottleneck in the mainline network, causing the exact kind of fractional second flicker I witnessed. I was trying to replicate the error." Henderson stared at him, his jaw tight. Jack's explanation was a dense cloud of technical jargon, plausible on the surface but built on a foundation of pure fiction. He had used his intimate knowledge of the system's complexities to weave a story that was too complicated to be instantly dismissed. "You theorized?" Henderson repeated, his voice dangerously low. "You don't have the authority to run unauthorized stress tests on the system's most sensitive areas based on a theory, Carter. You follow protocol. You escalate your findings. You do not go on a private little fishing expedition into our most classified archives." "I was just being thorough," Jack countered, trying to sound like a diligent but overzealous employee. "My mistake was not looping you in first, I admit that. But my intent was to identify a system vulnerability." Henderson was silent for a long, tense moment. Jack could see the conflict in his eyes. On the one hand, he had a clear-cut security breach. On the other, Jack had presented a semi-believable, if insubordinate, justification rooted in his job description. There was no obvious evidence of malicious intent, like data theft. Finally, Henderson made his decision. "You're done for the night. Your shift is over. As of this moment, your admin-level query permissions are revoked, effective immediately, pending a full internal review. Expect a formal, written reprimand in your permanent file, if you're even still employed here after the review is complete." He turned to the guard. "Escort Mr. Carter to his locker, and then to the exit." It was a devastating blow, but he was still standing. He hadn't been fired on the spot. He hadn't been detained. He had survived. As Henderson turned to speak with the guard, Jack saw his chance. It was a desperate, insane gamble. He turned back to his console, his fingers flying across the keyboard, feigning the act of logging out. He had seconds before his account was locked. He re-entered the archive address, but this time, instead of a simple ping, he requested the file's metadata. Who created it? When? Who was the project lead? The query command was sent. For a split second, text began to appear on his screen. Metadata for archive 4.8.15.16.23.42. Creation date, October 27, 2019. Project lead researcher, Dr. Aris Thorne. The screen flashed red. A large window popped up, covering everything. Access denied. User permissions insufficient. A second message appeared almost instantly. Account 774, J. Carter has been disabled. They were fast. His access was gone. But he had seen it. A name. Or part of one. Dr. Aris Thorne. Carter, I said, pack your things. Henderson's sharp voice cut through his thoughts. He had turned back, his eyes narrowed with suspicion. What was that you were just doing? Jack quickly minimized the window, his heart hammering. Just terminating the diagnostic scripts and wiping the session logs, sir, he said, his voice unervingly calm. Protocol. Henderson gave him a long, hard look, but nodded curtly. Jack stood up, grabbed his jacket, and walked toward the door, the guard falling into step behind him. He had been caught, reprimanded, and neutered. His ability to investigate from within Ethelred was gone. But as he walked through the sterile corridors, a new name, a new lead, echoed in his mind. Dr. Aris Thorne. Thomas. He didn't have the full name, but he had a start. He was no longer chasing a ghost in the machine. He was now hunting for a person. The walk out of the Ethelred data fortress was the longest of Jack's life. Each step, shadowed by the silent security guard, felt like a march towards an uncertain and ominous future. He was suspended, pending a review, but he knew what that meant. It was a corporate soft firing. They would conduct their investigation, find him guilty of gross insubordination and misuse of company assets, and terminate his employment. They would wipe his access, erase his digital presence from their servers, and he would become a ghost, just like the file he had been chasing. But they couldn't erase what he knew. Back in the disquieting silence of his apartment, the feeling of being caged was replaced by a gnawing sense of urgency. They were actively scrubbing Project Chimera from the servers. Soon, there would be nothing left to find. His internal access was gone, the digital door slammed shut and locked. He was an outsider now, and his only key was a partial name, a fragment of data he had snatched in the final second before his world went dark. Dr. Aris, though. He booted up his personal computer, the glow of the monitor a familiar comfort in the dim room. His investigation had to change tactics. He was no longer an analyst with access to a closed system. He was now a detective, sifting through the vast, messy ocean of public information. He started with the basics, running searches for the partial name combined with Ethelred security. He tried every common variation he could think of: Thomas, Thompson, Thornton. After an hour of digging through corporate news releases and old conference attendee lists, he found a match. Dr. Aris Thorne. The moment he saw her name, he knew it was right. A photograph, attached to a press release from 7 years ago announcing her hiring, showed a woman with sharp, intelligent eyes and an expression that was both intense and weary. The caption described her as a leading mind in theoretical physics, specializing in quantum entanglement and space-time topology. It was a perfect fit for a project that seemed to defy the normal laws of time. He began to build a timeline. Dr. Thorne had published a series of groundbreaking but controversial papers as a postdoctoral fellow at MIT. Then, 7 years ago, she was recruited by Ethelred to join their newly formed Advanced Research Division. For 5 years, her name appeared sporadically on company patents for data compression algorithms and network prediction models, all seemingly mundane applications for such a brilliant mind. And then 2 years ago, she had vanished. Her name simply stopped appearing. There was no farewell announcement, no mention of her moving to another company or university. Her official corporate bio on the Ethelred alumni page was a sanitized stub, listing only her years of service. He checked academic databases. No new papers had been published. He scoured social media. No profiles matched her name and photo. It was as if a person of her stature had simply ceased to exist. Coincidentally, the decommission date on the Subject 0 archive file was from the exact same period. She didn't just leave Ethelred, she fled, and she had covered her tracks. As Jack delved deeper, the paranoia that had been simmering in the back of his mind began to boil over. A black sedan, a make and model he'd never seen in his quiet suburban neighborhood, was parked across the street. It was there when he woke up, and it was still there in the late afternoon. When he deliberately walked outside to take out his trash, staring directly at it, the engine started and the car calmly drove away. It could be nothing. It could be everything. Later, he received a phone call from an unknown number. He answered, but there was only silence on the other end, not the dead air of a dropped call, but the charged, empty silence of an open line. He hung up, his heart pounding. The walls of his apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt thin and transparent. He was no longer just the observer, he was the observed. His search for Aris Thorne had hit a wall. Every lead went cold. Defeated, he was about to give up for the night when he tried one last, desperate search. He looked for her oldest published papers, the ones from her time at MIT, long before Ethelred. In the online archive of the university's physics department, he found a footnote in her student dissertation. It linked to a personal blog she had maintained as a graduate student. The blog itself was defunct, containing only a single, introspective post about the nature of echoes. But the username she had used was unique, almost poetic, Cassandra_echo. Cassandra, the prophetess from Greek mythology, cursed to speak the truth but never be believed. It was too fitting to be a coincidence. On a wild hunch, Jack drove back to the public library. He couldn't risk using his home network, not now. From an anonymous terminal, he opened an encrypted email service and composed a new message. He sent it to an address that was a pure guess, Cassandra_echo@protonmail.com. For the subject line, he typed the one thing that would mean something only to someone on the inside. 4815162342. In the body of the email, he kept it simple, a single question that cut to the heart of the matter. What happened to Subject 0? He hit send, feeling a mix of foolishness and desperation. He expected the email to bounce back, or to simply vanish into the ether, unread. He waited at the library terminal for hours, watching the clock tick, feeling the last of his hope dwindle. Then, his burner phone vibrated in his pocket. A notification. A new email had arrived in the encrypted inbox he was using. It wasn't a reply from the Cassandra_echo address, but a new message from a randomized, untraceable sender. He opened it. The message was brief, devoid of any greeting or explanation, and it made the hairs on his neck stand on end. They record everything. Voice, data, heat. Don't use this channel again. Northwood Park. The Fountain. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. sharp. Sit on the north-facing bench. If I don't approach you within 5 minutes, you were followed. Leave and never try to find me again. The message vanished from his screen 5 seconds after he finished reading it, the email client informing him that it had been remotely deleted. He stared at the blank screen, his own reflection looking back at him. He had found her. Dr. Aris Thorne was real, she was in hiding, and she was terrified. And he was about to walk into the open to meet her. The morning of the meeting dawned gray and oppressive, the sky a flat, featureless canvas that mirrored Jack's own anxiety. Sleep had been a series of fitful, paranoid vignettes, and he felt a profound exhaustion deep in his bones. This was no longer just about a file on a server. He was about to meet the ghostwriter of his entire nightmare. He spent 2 hours meticulously planning his route to Northwood Park, his analyst's mind kicking into overdrive. He left his apartment on foot, walking 5 blocks in the wrong direction before catching a city bus heading crosstown. He rode it for 3 miles, got off, and immediately entered a bustling subway station. He took the train 2 stops, exited, and walked through a crowded shopping mall, never stopping, just blending with the river of anonymous faces. Finally, he hailed a taxi for the last leg of the journey to the park. It was excessive, the kind of tradecraft he'd only ever seen in movies, but the memory of the black sedan and the silent phone call was a cold weight in his gut. He was not going to lead them to her. Northwood Park was an oasis of forced tranquility in the heart of the city. Mothers pushed strollers, students read on blankets, and an old man fed pigeons by the fountain. The sheer normalcy of it all was unnerving. At precisely 2 p.m., Jack sat down on the designated north-facing bench. He stared at the fountain's cascading water, every nerve ending tingling with anticipation. The 5 minutes Aris Thorne had specified stretched into an eternity. He watched the second hand on his watch sweep, each tick a hammer blow against the silence. 4 minutes. 4.5. He was about to leave, his heart sinking with the thought that he had failed, that he had been followed after all. Then, a woman sat down on the far end of the bench. She was dressed in a simple pair of jeans, a nondescript jacket, and a baseball cap pulled down low over her face. Large sunglasses hid her eyes. She placed a book on her lap and spoke to the fountain, her voice a low, steady murmur that was barely audible above the splashing water. "You're 30 seconds late." It was her. The voice from the press release photo, but stripped of its confidence, now edged with a brittle, nervous energy. "The taxi hit traffic," Jack replied, his own voice tight. "Who are you?" she asked, still not looking at him. "Why are you looking for me?" "I'm the one who received the message," Jack said. "From Subject 0. At the mention of the name, her shoulders tensed. For the first time, she turned her head slightly, the dark lenses of her sunglasses fixing on him. She seemed to be scanning him, analyzing him, and he had the distinct impression she was seeing more than just a scared man on a park bench. Her name was Elena, Aris Thorne said, her voice cracking for just a moment. She was my colleague, my friend, and Ethelred erased her. The dam of her composure seemed to break, and the story came tumbling out in a torrent of hushed, urgent words. Project Chimera wasn't a piece of hardware. It was a bridge. We built a machine based on quantum entanglement that could open a stable, microscopic wormhole. The goal wasn't to transport matter, but data. We were trying to create a temporal modem, a way to send and receive information from the immediate future. Jack stared at her, stunned. Time travel. Not travel, she corrected sharply. Communication. We could send a query and receive a response from a few seconds, then minutes, then hours ahead. It was the greatest discovery in human history, and we were doing it in a basement for a corporation that wanted to use it to predict stock market fluctuations. She explained that Elena had been the lead engineer, the one with the intuitive grasp of the temporal mechanics. She volunteered to be the first human operator, interfacing with the machine directly. The string of numbers Jack had found, 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42, wasn't a code. It was Elena's unique biochronometric signature, the key that allowed the machine to lock onto her consciousness. But the bridge was unstable, Aris continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. The further ahead we looked, the more feedback we got. The echoes became unpredictable. We started getting data back that was corrupted, fractured. Glimpses of futures that shouldn't exist. The image you saw, the derelict server room, that was one of the last echoes we received before we lost her. It was a probability stain, a vision of a future where the machine had run rampant, where its failure had caused a collapse. And Elena? Jack asked. Aris shook her head, a flicker of profound pain crossing her face. Something went wrong during the final test. A power surge. The connection shattered. Elena was unmoored. She isn't dead. We think she was thrown loose in the time stream, fragmented. The message you received was her last, desperate SOS, blasted back across the collapsing bridge before it closed for good. So Ethelred shut it down. That's why they're wiping the servers. No, Aris said, and the intensity in her voice made Jack's blood run cold. They didn't shut it down. They classified it. The man in charge of the research division, Silas Croft, he saw the failure not as a disaster, but as an opportunity. He's not trying to bury the project. He's trying to rebuild it. Bigger. More powerful. He thinks he can control it, weaponize it. The server purge isn't about erasing the past. It's about clearing the site to build the future. Your anomaly was a residual aftershock, a sign that the wound in space-time we created is still there, and Croft is trying to rip it back open. She finally turned to face him fully, her expression grim. I built a backdoor into the system. A software failsafe, a kill switch that can overload the core and sever the connection for good. But it has to be run from Elena's original terminal, the primary console in the old lab. I can't get back inside, but you still have a security clearance, even if you are suspended. You might be the only one who can. As she spoke, her gaze flickered to something over Jack's shoulder. All the color drained from her face. Oh God, she breathed. Gray coat. By the bridge. He's here. They found us. Jack's head whipped around. Standing on a small stone bridge 100 yards away was a nondescript man in a gray coat, talking into his wrist. He wasn't looking at them, but he was watching them. Aris shot to her feet, pressing a tiny metallic object into Jack's hand. It was a sleek, encrypted flash drive. Lab 3, she said, her voice a frantic whisper. The console is behind a false cooling panel on the west wall. This is the decryption key. The program is called Echo's End. You have to run it, Jack. You have to finish what we started. The man in the gray coat began walking towards them, his pace quickening. Go, Aris hissed. Now. They broke apart, running in opposite directions, swallowed by the chaos of the panicked crowd as people scattered. Jack clutched the drive in his fist, his heart hammering. He had the key. He had the mission. And the hunters were no longer shadows. They were right behind him. Panic is a primal conductor. It bypasses thought and channels pure, animal instinct. Jack ran. He didn't look back to see if the man in the gray coat was following, or what had happened to Aris. To look back was to hesitate, and to hesitate was to be caught. He plunged into the thickest parts of the dispersing crowd, using the chaos as his shield. He pushed past startled families and angry teenagers, his only thought to put distance between himself and the fountain. He sprinted for 3 city blocks, his lungs burning, before ducking into the open doors of a city bus just as it was pulling away from the curb. He collapsed into a seat in the back, gasping for air, his heart trying to hammer its way out of his chest. He had no idea where the bus was going, and he didn't care. It was moving, taking him away. Through the grimy window, the city blurred into a meaningless smear of concrete and glass. Every person he saw on the street seemed to be watching him. Every dark car seemed to be the black sedan from his neighborhood. He was a loose thread, and he could feel the entire city pulling at him, trying to unravel him. An hour later, he got off in a part of the city he barely recognized. It was a gritty, industrial neighborhood of warehouses and low-rent apartment blocks, a place where people learned not to ask questions. He found a run-down motel called the Starlight Inn, whose flickering neon sign suggested anything but. The clerk behind the bulletproof glass barely glanced at him as Jack paid for 1 night in cash. The room was small, smelled of stale smoke and bleach, and the lock on the door felt flimsy. But it was anonymous. It was a temporary haven. Jack bolted the door, jammed a chair under the knob, and finally allowed himself to collapse onto the lumpy bed. The adrenaline that had fueled his flight drained away, leaving behind a chilling residue of terror and the crushing weight of the mission Aris had given him. He was no longer an analyst investigating an anomaly. He was a fugitive, entrusted with the fate of a future he had only glimpsed in a nightmare. He emptied his pockets onto the stained bedspread. A few crumpled bills, his wallet, a burner phone, his personal smartphone, and the small, cool weight of the encrypted drive. The first thing he did was power down his smartphone and, using a paperclip from the desk, pry out the SIM card. The device was a tracking beacon, and he was done broadcasting his location. He lay on his back, staring at the water-stained ceiling, and tried to think. The objective was clear: get back inside the Ethelred data fortress, find a decommissioned lab on a sublevel, locate a hidden console, and run a program called Echo's End. Spelled out like that, it was ludicrous, impossible. His employee ID card would already be deactivated. The guards at the front entrance would have his photo. Walking in the front door was a death sentence. But he wasn't a spy. He was an analyst. And for 3 years, his job had been to analyze Ethelred's security. He didn't just watch the cameras. He watched the systems, the routines, the protocols. He knew the building's digital and physical rhythms better than anyone. His mind, now clear of the initial panic, began to work, sifting through years of monotonous observations. He thought about the night shift, his shift, the skeleton crew, the reduced security protocols. He remembered the maintenance access tunnel on sub-level 2. It was an old service corridor, used mostly for plumbing and electrical work. Its security door wasn't tied into the main state-of-the-art network. It ran on an older, isolated system that was rarely audited. And the night shift maintenance chief, a grizzled old-timer named Sal, was predictably lazy. He always started his rounds on the upper floors and rarely made it down to the sublevels before 4 a.m. Jack knew this because he'd logged Sal's movements, night after night, for 3 years. There was a window, between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m., where that corridor was a blind spot. A plan, desperate and fragile, began to form. He could get in, but could he do what came next? Navigate the sublevels, find Lab 3 without a map, and avoid the internal patrols? The doubt was a cold, heavy blanket. He was a man who sat in a chair and looked at screens. What Aris was asking of him was suicide. He reached for the encrypted drive, his last, tangible connection to her. He needed to know what he was carrying. He booted up his laptop, running a secure, live version of a privacy-focused operating system from a separate USB stick to avoid leaving any trace on his hard drive. He plugged in the drive Aris had given him. A single folder appeared. Inside were 2 files. One was a heavily encrypted executable, echozen.exe. The other was a simple text file, readme.txt. His heart skipped a beat. He opened the text file. The message was short, and it hit him with the force of a physical blow. Jack, if you're reading this, I probably didn't get away. Don't waste time looking for me. They won't make the same mistake twice. Elena's message wasn't just a warning about a machine. It was a plea. She saw time as something beautiful, a current to be observed, not a cage to be rattled. Croft and his people see it as a weapon to be aimed. The future you saw in that flicker is just one of many possibilities, but it's the one they are steering us towards. Don't let her sacrifice, her echo, be for nothing. The drive is encrypted with her chronometer signature. The numbers. They are the key. Good luck. All the doubt, all the fear, evaporated, burned away by the cold, grim certainty of the words. Aris was likely captured. He was truly the last person who knew the truth. This was no longer just about preventing a disaster. It was about honoring the legacy of two women who had stared into the abyss. Jack looked at the cheap digital clock on the bedside table. It was 9:47 p.m. His old shift started in just over 2 hours. He stood up, his body aching but his mind sharp. It was time to go to work, one last time. There is a unique clarity that comes from having everything taken from you. Stripped of his job, his home, and his identity, Jack felt a strange and potent sense of focus. In the grimy motel room, he prepared for his return to Ethelred not as an employee, but as an invader. He changed into a dark hoodie and jeans, clothes that would blend into the shadows. He left his wallet, his keys, and every other piece of his old life on the nightstand. The only items he took were the burner phone, his small multi-tool, and the encrypted flash drive from Aris, which he secured in a zippered pocket. He was a ghost returning to his haunting grounds, and ghosts carry no baggage. The journey back downtown was a masterclass in paranoia. Jack moved through the city's forgotten arteries, sticking to unlit back alleys and the shadows of hulking industrial buildings. Every distant siren, every pair of headlights that swept across a wall, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He moved with a purpose he'd never felt before, his senses dialed to a level of sensitivity that was both exhausting and exhilarating. He was no longer just watching the world through a screen. He was inside it, a mouse navigating a maze filled with unseen cats. He reached the perimeter of the Ethelred data fortress just after midnight. The building loomed against the night sky, a modern monolith of glass and steel, its windows dark save for the few offices where the truly devoted, or the truly miserable, worked into the night. The main entrances were bathed in the sterile white light of high-intensity floodlights, patrolled by guards he knew by name. He ignored them, circling around to the west side of the building, to a spot he had noted years ago but never had a reason to use. It was a large ventilation access grate, set low against the building's concrete foundation and hidden from the street by a row of dense, ornamental shrubs. According to the schematics he had memorized, the intake duct led to a primary utility corridor that ran parallel to the sub-level 2 maintenance tunnel. The grate was secured with heavy bolts, but they were old, rusted from years of rain and neglect. He knelt in the damp mulch, pulled out his multi-tool, and set to work. The metal groaned in protest, the sound deafening in the quiet night, but after 10 agonizing minutes, the last bolt gave way. He lifted the heavy grate, slipped into the dark opening, and pulled it shut behind him. The air inside was cool and smelled of damp concrete and ozone. He was in. He navigated the cramped utility corridor by the dim light of his burner phone, the sounds of the building's mechanical guts humming all around him. He found the door he was looking for, stenciled with the label, Maintenance Tunnel 2B. This was the door from his plan, the one that should have a simple, outdated keypad. His heart sank into his stomach. The keypad was gone. In its place was a sleek, new panel with a single, glowing blue RFID sensor. They had upgraded it. His plan, so carefully constructed, had crumbled to dust at the first hurdle. His deactivated ID card was useless. He was locked out, trapped between an impassable door and the outside world where faceless men were hunting him. He leaned his head against the cold steel of the door, despair washing over him. It was over. He had failed. But then, Aris's message echoed in his mind. Don't let her echo be for nothing. He pushed himself off the door, his analyst's brain kicking back into gear, overriding the panic. He couldn't go through the lock, so he would have to go around it. He remembered the power schematics. Tertiary systems like this weren't on the main grid, they were routed through localized junction boxes. If he could find the box for this section, he might be able to manually override the lock. He scanned the walls and found it 10 feet away, a gray metal box with a standard tumbler lock. It was a lock meant to keep lazy employees out, not a determined saboteur. Within seconds, he had picked it with a tool from his kit. Inside was a nest of color-coded wires. He scanned them, his mind racing to recall the technical manuals. He was looking for the direct power feed to the maglock. He remembered a safety protocol. In the event of a specific type of power surge, the maglocks would momentarily disengage during their reboot cycle to prevent people from being trapped during a fire or emergency. It was a 1 in a million shot. If he shorted the wrong wires, he could trigger a building-wide security alert. He took a deep breath, identified the 2 terminals he needed, and jammed the head of his pliers between them. Sparks erupted with a loud crackle. The overhead lights in the corridor flickered violently and went out, plunging him into darkness. And in the sudden silence, he heard the most beautiful sound in the world, the heavy thunk of the maglock on the tunnel door disengaging. He didn't hesitate. He scrambled to the door, yanked it open, and slipped inside just as the corridor's emergency lighting kicked on behind him. The heavy steel door swung shut, the latch failing to catch, sealing him in the tomb-like darkness of the maintenance tunnel. He was in. He stood perfectly still, allowing his eyes to adjust to the near-total blackness. He could taste the familiar, stale air of the deep facility. He had done it. A moment of triumph surged through him, but it was immediately extinguished. From the far end of the long, straight tunnel, a new sound reached him. It wasn't the familiar hum of servers or air conditioners. It was a low, electric whirring, and it was getting closer. A thin, horizontal line of piercing blue light sliced through the darkness, sweeping from side to side, methodically scanning the empty corridor. It was a new model of security drone, faster and more advanced than the ones he was used to. And it was coming directly towards him. He flattened himself against the wall, trapped in the narrow tunnel with nowhere to run and nowhere to hide. The drone's blue optical sensor was a merciless, sweeping blade of light, cutting the darkness into sections. In a few more seconds, it would slice across Jack's position, and it would all be over. His mind, supercharged with adrenaline, processed the environment with astonishing speed. The tunnel was a tube of concrete and steel, offering no alcoves, no side passages, no escape. But it was functional. It was the building's circulatory system. And running along the ceiling, thick as a man's arm, was a high-voltage power conduit. His eyes followed the conduit and found what he was looking for, a junction box, its cover plate hanging slightly ajar. It was a classic example of Sal's shoddy maintenance, a minor infraction he had logged a dozen times to no effect. Now, that laziness was his only hope. Lying near the wall, almost invisible in the gloom, was a length of rusted rebar, likely forgotten during the tunnel's construction decades ago. An idea, born of pure desperation, sparked in his mind. He didn't have time to think it through. The whirring of the drone was growing louder, closer. He grabbed the heavy rebar and scrambled up a series of smaller pipes on the wall, his shoes slipping on the dusty metal. He reached the junction box just as the drone's blue light swept across the floor beneath him. He clung to the conduit, his muscles screaming in protest. With one hand, he tore the loose cover plate off the box, exposing the thick, insulated terminals within. The drone was directly below him now, its sensor tilting up as if it had detected a change in the air. Jack held his breath, wedged the rebar deep inside the junction box, and pushed it against two of the main terminals. The effect was instantaneous and violent. A blinding flash of white light erupted from the box, followed by a deafening bang that echoed down the tunnel. A shower of brilliant blue sparks rained down, and the acrid smell of ozone filled the air. The drone convulsed in the electrical discharge. Its blue light strobed erratically, it spun in a tight, uncontrolled circle, and then, with a final pathetic whine, it crashed to the concrete floor, silent and dead. The tunnel was plunged back into a profound darkness and a ringing silence. Jack's arms gave out, and he dropped to the floor, landing hard, the impact jarring his teeth. He lay there for a moment, gasping for air, his heart doing a frantic trip hammer beat against his ribs. He had won. But he knew the power surge, even in this forgotten tunnel, would have registered as a low-level alert in some distant control room. He didn't have much time before a maintenance worker, maybe even Sal himself, was dispatched to investigate. He got to his feet and began to move, leaving the dead drone behind as a testament to his brief, violent intrusion. He moved deeper into the facility, a ghost navigating by memory and instinct. The maintenance tunnels were a maze, but for 3 years, their layout had been a part of the background radiation of his life. He took a left at the noisy air recycling unit, a right at the junction with the humming water coolant pipes. He was descending deeper into the building's subconscious, a place of pure function, devoid of any human touch. After what felt like an eternity, he found the access hatch he was looking for. He turned the wheel, pushed the heavy steel panel open, and emerged into a world of sterile white. The air was colder here, the oppressive hum of the building's core replaced by an unnerving, high-tech silence. He knew immediately where he was, the decommissioned Advanced Research Wing. This was Silas Croft's old kingdom, and it had been upgraded. The floor tiles were a seamless, polished composite he didn't recognize, and he instinctively trod carefully, suspecting pressure sensors. The camera domes on the ceiling were smaller, darker, and more numerous than in the rest of the facility. These weren't for watching bored night shift employees, they were for watching for threats. A shiver went down his spine. Aris was right. This place wasn't abandoned, it was being refortified. He moved down the main corridor, his soft-soled shoes making no sound. He was looking for a specific hallway, a spur off the main artery that had housed the smaller, more experimental labs. He found it, a turn-off identical to any other, except for the faintest outline on the wall where a directory sign had once been mounted. He stepped into the hallway and froze. The walls were lined with 5 identical doors, 3 on the left, 2 on the right. They were seamless slabs of brushed steel, with no windows, no labels, no numbers. All the designations had been removed, creating a perfectly anonymous, baffling facade. One of these was Lab 3. The others were dead ends, or worse, traps. His mind raced, trying to pull a clear image from the hundreds of times he had glanced at the old schematics on his screen. The primary labs were on the left. Lab 3 was the middle door. Yes, the middle door on the left. He was almost sure. He took a tentative step towards the third door, his hand reaching for the recessed handle. As his fingers brushed the cold steel, a soft, almost musical chime echoed from the far end of the main corridor he had just left. It was a sound he knew all too well, a sound that had no place in this dead, forgotten wing at this time of night. It was the chime of an elevator arriving at his level. He wasn't alone down here anymore, and he was out of time. The elevator chime was a death knell in the sterile silence. Jack's blood ran cold. There was nowhere to hide. The polished white corridor offered no shadows, no alcoves. His mind screamed at him to run, but his training took over. He scrambled backward, pulling himself out of the pristine research wing and back into the grimy mouth of the maintenance tunnel. He pressed his body flat against the rough concrete wall, peering around the sharp edge of the doorway, making himself as small as possible. He was hidden, but only just. The stainless steel elevator doors slid open with a soft sigh. A single figure stepped out. It was the man in the gray coat from the park. He moved with a calm, predatory grace, his footsteps utterly silent on the composite floor. He held a small, glowing data tablet in one hand and had a nearly invisible communications device tucked into one ear. He was not a security guard, he was a hunter. As the man, whom Jack would forever think of as Mr. Pierce, walked slowly down the corridor, Jack could hear the faint, tinny whisper of a voice from his earpiece. Pierce spoke in a low, respectful tone, his words cutting through the silence and confirming Jack's worst fears. The alert was minor, sir. A power surge on sub-level 2. One of the new patrol drones is offline. There was a pause. Yes, the timing is coincidental. We have teams sweeping the lower levels now. If it is Carter, he's a rat in a trap. Pierce stopped walking, his gaze sweeping over the blank, identical doors. Jack held his breath, praying the man's eyes wouldn't drift towards the dark opening where he was hiding. The asset is contained, Pierce continued into his comms. Jack's stomach clenched. Asset, Aris. She remains uncooperative, but she will be convinced. Another pause. No, sir. The core installation proceeds on schedule. The new hardware is in place. We'll be ready for the initial system boot at 0600. Croft's legacy will be secure. The name hit Jack like a physical blow. Silas Croft. The executive Aris had mentioned. He was here now, directing the hunt from afar. Mr. Pierce stopped directly in front of the middle door on the left, the very door Jack had been about to open. He didn't try to enter. Instead, he held his data tablet up, and a complex schematic of the room beyond appeared on its screen. Lab 3 environmentals are stable, Pierce reported. No internal breach. Whatever he's doing, he isn't in here yet. He lowered the tablet, turned with chilling efficiency, and walked back to the elevator, his mission complete. He had confirmed the lab was secure, and in doing so, had confirmed its exact location for Jack. The elevator doors hissed shut, and silence once again descended on the corridor. Jack waited for a full 2 minutes, his ears straining for any sound, before he dared to move. He crept out of the tunnel and approached the correct door. There was no handle, no keypad, no visible lock. It was a seamless wall of steel. He remembered Aris's last, frantic words, and the drive she had pressed into his palm. It was more than just storage, it was a key. He examined the wall next to the door and found it, a tiny, almost invisible data port, no bigger than a pinhead. He pulled out the encrypted drive. The USB casing felt unusually solid, its shape slightly customized. He lined it up with the port and pushed. It clicked into place, and the drive began to emit a soft, pulsing light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a near-silent hiss of hydraulics, the heavy steel door slid sideways into the wall, revealing the darkness within. Jack slipped inside, and the door slid shut behind him, sealing him in. He used his burner phone's weak light to scan the room. The air was thick with the dust of disuse, yet heavy with the lingering scent of ozone. The lab was in a state of controlled decay. Most of the peripheral equipment was shrouded in yellowing plastic sheets, but clear footprints were visible in the thick dust on the floor. Pierce's report was wrong. Someone had been in here. Recently. In the center of the room, dominating the space, was the heart of Project Chimera. It was a sphere, 10 feet in diameter, constructed from a complex lattice of superconducting wire, polished alloys, and strange, crystalline components that seemed to drink the light from his phone. It was beautiful and terrifying, a sleeping god of metal and wire. Pushing aside his awe, Jack remembered his mission. The west wall. A false cooling panel. He found the wall and ran his hands over the identical metal plates. One of them, the third from the top, felt different. It shifted slightly under his touch. He pushed, and it swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a dark, hidden alcove. Inside was a single workstation, a chair, and a computer terminal. The monitor was an old, bulky CRT, a relic from another era. This was it. Elena's console. The sanctum within the lab. He sat down in the worn chair, the leather cracked and cold. He took a deep, steadying breath and pressed the power button on the console. With a low hum, the monitor flickered to life, bathing his face in a ghostly green glow. A single line of text appeared, blinking slowly. Chimera OS version 1.3, enter chronometric key. This was the moment of truth. He took the drive from the door's control port and inserted it into the console. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, ready to type the numbers, the sequence that had started it all. He froze. A sound. It was soft, almost too quiet to hear, but in the profound silence of the lab, it was as loud as a gunshot. Click, click, click. It was a rhythmic, mechanical sound, and it was coming from the massive, dormant machine in the center of the room. Jack's eyes darted from the screen to the sphere. On its metallic surface, one of thousands of tiny indicator lights, a light that should have been dark for 2 years, began to pulse with a faint, ethereal blue light. The machine wasn't dead. It was dreaming. And Jack had the terrible feeling that he had just woken it up. The rhythmic click, 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 was the sound of a clock in a nightmare, counting down to a moment Jack couldn't comprehend. The single pulsing blue light on the Chimera device seemed to watch him, a cyclopean eye opening after a long slumber. A low hum vibrated through the floor, and the air in the hidden alcove grew thick, charged with a static that made the fine hairs on his arms stand on end. The machine wasn't just active. It was responding to him. It was responding to Elena's key. The realization shattered his hesitation. This wasn't a random malfunction, it was a connection. With a new, desperate urgency, he turned back to the glowing green screen of the console. His fingers flew across the keyboard, typing the sequence that had become his mantra. 4, 8, 15, 16, 23, 42. He pressed the enter key. He expected a password confirmation, a simple entry into the system. He was wrong. The screen erupted. It wasn't a clean interface, but a chaotic torrent of raw data, a real-time diagnostic of a system in catastrophic failure. Lines of code scrolled past too fast to read. Timestamps flickered between the past, present, and fractions of a second into the future. And in the center of the screen, a series of stark, red warnings flashed in a loop. Warning, Eidolon cascade detected. Warning, chronometric anchor unstable. Warning, signal fragmentation at 98%. The humming from the machine in the main lab grew louder, rising in pitch to a painful whine. The clicking sound accelerated, becoming a frantic, high-speed chatter. This wasn't just an echo Aris had told him about. This was an open wound, and he had just stuck his hand into it. Then, amidst the chaos of the scrolling data, other things began to appear. They were like digital flotsam, fragments of a shipwreck rising to the surface of a stormy sea. They were log entries, signed with the initials EV Elena Vance. That must have been her name. Log, EV, Test 7. Connection stable at +3 hours. We did it, Aris. The future feels quiet, peaceful. Log, EV, power surge. My God, the feedback is, it's not linear. The echoes are folding back on themselves. Silas, shut it down. A garbled audio file played through the console's tinny speaker, a woman's voice distorted by static and terror. Static, can't hold the lock. The numbers were supposed to be a failsafe, a shutdown sequence. Silas, he's reversing the polarity. He's trying to. Static. Don't let him find the anchor. A scream, cut short. An anchor. The word sent a chill through Jack that had nothing to do with the room's dropping temperature. He frantically searched the fragmented logs for the term. Another text fragment appeared, stark and clear against the scrolling chaos. He doesn't want to shut it down. He never did. He sees me as the anchor. A fixed point. He thinks if he can amplify my echo, he can stabilize the bridge by force. He's not trying to save me. He's trying to cage me. The horrible truth crashed down on Jack with the force of a physical blow. Silas Croft wasn't just a ruthless executive covering up a disaster. He was a monster. He wasn't trying to rebuild the machine to predict the stock market. He was rebuilding it to hunt for Elena in the wilderness of time. He wanted to capture her fragmented consciousness, her eidolon, and use her as a permanent, unwilling key to unlock and control his temporal weapon. The hardware purge, the new installation, the test scheduled for 0600, it was all part of a monstrous rescue mission twisted into an act of digital necromancy. "I won't let him," Jack whispered to the empty room. He quickly navigated through the archaic directory structure until he found the file Aris had planted. echosend.exe. His fingers trembled as he typed the command, execute echosend.exe. He hit enter. The system's response was immediate and crushing. Command locked. System in unstable cascade state. Execution of core shutdown protocols prohibited until temporal resonance is below threshold 7.4. It wouldn't let him. It was like trying to shut off a nuclear reactor in the middle of a meltdown. The safety protocols prevented any action that could exacerbate the instability. He couldn't kill the machine while it was thrashing. Defeated, he slumped in his chair. But then, a new prompt blinked onto the screen, replacing the error message. It was a simple, terrifying question. Initiate stabilization protocol? Y/N. He understood instantly. The system was offering him a choice. To run the failsafe, to destroy the machine, he first had to lower the temporal resonance. He had to run the stabilization protocol. He had to reach into the storm and comet, just for a moment, before he could collapse the thundercloud. He would have to briefly and intentionally do what Croft was trying to do, strengthen the connection, stabilize the echo, in order to create the one fleeting moment of calm required to shut it down forever. It was an insane, paradoxical risk. As he stared at the blinking cursor, the single blue light on the Chimera device in the other room flared, becoming a brilliant, piercing beam that cast long, dancing shadows across the lab. The temperature in the alcove plunged, and his breath plumed in the air. The machine was waking up, and time, all around him, was running out. The blinking cursor on the screen was a question poised at the edge of an abyss. Initiate stabilization protocol? Y/N. To the left, a path of certain failure. To the right, a path of unimaginable risk. The machine in the lab was now shrieking, a high-frequency keen that vibrated in Jack's teeth. The air was so cold his exhaled breath hung in a white cloud in the green glow of the monitor. He thought of Aris, captured. He thought of Elena, lost and screaming from the static. He thought of Silas Croft, preparing to harness this nightmare. There was no choice. There was only the mission. His finger, numb with cold, stabbed the Y key. He hit enter. For one terrifying second, the world ended. The console screen went utterly black. The shrieking from the lab stopped. The pulsing lights died. Every sound, every vibration, every sensation ceased. Jack was suspended in a moment of absolute silence and darkness, a void so complete he wondered if he had died. Then, with the violence of a star being born, the lab exploded back into existence. The console screen flashed to life, no longer a chaotic scroll of errors, but a display of a beautiful, terrifyingly complex waveform, a symmetrical pattern of light and energy that pulsed in time with his own frantic heartbeat. At the top of the screen, a single line of text glowed. Stabilization protocol engaged. Synchronizing chronometric anchor. The effect in the main lab was immediate and spectacular. The low hum from the Chimera device deepened into a pure, resonant tone, a perfect musical note that seemed to hang in the air. The single blue light erupted, branching out into a shimmering web of sapphire energy that traced the intricate latticework of the sphere. The main lights overhead flickered, died, and then flared back on, but their normal white light was gone, replaced by an eerie, pulsating violet that painted the room in shades of bruised twilight. Dust and small objects on the lab benches began to levitate, swirling gently in an unseen current. Jack stared, mesmerized and horrified. He was witnessing the raw, untamed power of the machine, the very force that had torn Elena from reality. The console speaker, which had previously only issued static and screams, crackled to life. This time, there was no distortion. It was Elena's voice, clear and impossibly close, yet overlaid with a strange whispering echo, as if she were speaking from two moments at once. "You did it," the voice said, a mix of awe and terror. "The signal is clear. But it's a trap. What do you mean?" Jack whispered back, knowing it was insane to talk to a computer. "The stabilization protocol," Elena's voice explained, strained with effort. "It focuses my echo, yes, but it also creates a beacon, a homing signal. Croft doesn't need to find you anymore. By stabilizing me, you've lit a fire in the darkness. He can see the console. He can see you. He's locking on right now. You have to be fast." Her words were a bucket of ice water, snapping him out of his trance. He had calmed the storm, but in doing so, he had just broadcast his exact location to the lighthouse keeper. He furiously hit the escape key, the beautiful waveform vanishing, replaced by the stark, green text of the command line. His fingers, clumsy with adrenaline, flew across the keyboard. Execute echosend.exe. He slammed the enter key with the palm of his hand. The system accepted the command without hesitation. A new window opened, dominating the screen. It was a simple, brutal interface, a single, horizontal progress bar, currently empty. Below it, stark text appeared. Echoes and failsafe initiated. Purging core systems and overloading primary capacitors. Estimated time to total system failure, 120 seconds. 2 minutes. It was an eternity and no time at all. The progress bar began to fill, a slow, agonizing crawl of green pixels. 5%. 10%. As the failsafe began its work, the Chimera device fought back. The resonant tone warped, becoming a deafening, discordant shriek of mechanical pain. The web of energy covering its surface intensified, the violet light in the room strobing violently. The air around the sphere began to shimmer and warp, like extreme heat haze, and reality itself seemed to bend around it. The swirling debris in the room began to spin faster, caught in a miniature vortex. Then, a new sound cut through the chaos. A thunderous, metallic bang that came from the lab's entrance. The sound was so loud it shook the floor. Jack's head whipped around to look at the security monitor showing the hallway. It was offline, but he didn't need it. Bang! A large, circular dent blossomed in the center of the reinforced steel door. They weren't trying to unlock it. They were using a battering ram. On the console, the progress bar crept to 25%. The shrieking from the machine reached an impossible, glass-shattering pitch. From the speaker, Elena's voice whispered one last, heartbreaking thing. They're here. I'm sorry. Boom. The steel door groaned, the locking mechanism shearing with a screech of tortured metal. It was going to burst open at any second. Jack was trapped, a lone sentry in the heart of a temporal apocalypse, with the unstoppable force of the machine trying to tear reality apart from the inside, and Croft's hunters about to do the same from the out. With a final catastrophic shriek of tearing metal, the lab door was ripped from its magnetic locks and thrown inward, crashing against a row of equipment with the force of a car wreck. Through the smoke and settling dust of the ruined doorway, 3 figures emerged. Mr. Pierce stood in the center, flanked by 2 security operators in full black tactical gear, their faces hidden by ballistic masks and their assault rifles held at the ready. They advanced into a scene from a fever dream. The air was a maelstrom of swirling dust and levitating debris, caught in a gravity-defying dance. The light strobed from a sickly violet to blinding white, casting shifting, monstrous shadows that seemed to writhe on the walls. And at the heart of it all, the Chimera device shrieked, a sound of pure physical agony that pressed in on them, making rational thought impossible. Pierce's men, trained for any tactical situation, hesitated for a half-second, their professionalism faltering in the face of a battlefield where the laws of physics were in open rebellion. Pierce was the first to recover. His cold eyes cut through the chaos and locked onto the alcove, where Jack was hunched over the console, the green glow of the progress bar illuminating his terrified face. Carter! Pierce's voice was a raw bellow, somehow managing to rise above the cacophony. Step away from the terminal. Shut it down. One of the operators started to advance, his rifle trained on Jack. Desperate, Jack grabbed the only thing within reach, the heavy, obsolete keyboard from the console, and hurled it with all his strength. But time in the lab was becoming elastic. The keyboard left his hands at full speed, then seemed to hit a pocket of invisible molasses. It slowed, tumbling end over end in an impossibly graceful arc before clattering uselessly to the floor a few feet away. The operator paused, baffled by the strange sight. Pierce, however, was not deterred. Ignore the light show, he commanded. The console is the target. Get him away from it. The second operator broke from his position, lunging towards the alcove. He was 3 feet away when the Chimera device pulsed with a violent, convulsive shudder. A wave of force, visible only as a ripple in the shimmering air, erupted from it. The operator was thrown sideways as if hit by an invisible truck, slamming into a server rack with a sickening crunch. From the console speaker, Elena's voice, now a powerful, resonant chorus of echoes, cried out, "You will not touch him!" A brilliant, white-hot arc of pure energy, raw temporal lightning, leaped from the sphere and struck the floor at the feet of the first operator. The composite tiles vaporized, leaving a smoking, molten crater. The man scrambled back, his training utterly useless against an enemy that could command the very fabric of the room. The progress bar on Jack's screen ticked past 70%. The overload was becoming critical. The shriek from the machine began to subside, replaced by a deep, resonant hum that grew steadily in volume. It felt less like a sound and more like a vibration that was shaking the foundations of the building and the atoms in Jack's own body. Pierce saw his window of opportunity closing. His men were neutralized by the sheer physics-defying chaos. Brute force had failed. With a snarl of fury, he shoved his rifle aside and drew his sidearm, a heavy-caliber pistol. He began to advance on the alcove himself, his steps sure and steady, his will a match for the temporal storm. "It's over, Carter," he yelled, his voice strained. "Croft will build another. Better. You haven't saved anyone. You've just become a ghost in the machine, same as her." He was 10 feet away. 85%. He was 5 feet away. 90%. The deep hum was now the only sound in the world, a note that promised utter annihilation. The progress bar crept to 99%. The hum stopped. An absolute, deafening silence fell over the lab. All the swirling debris dropped to the floor with a collective clatter. The strobing light ceased, replaced by a pure, clean, impossibly bright white light that poured from the core of the Chimera device. It wasn't a light that illuminated, it was a light that was. It erased all shadows, all colors, all textures. In that moment of serene, silent apocalypse, Jack saw everything with perfect clarity. He saw the green progress bar on his screen hit 100%, the word complete flashing once. He saw Mr. Pierce, his face a mask of cold, determined fury, taking final aim at his chest. He saw the man's finger tighten on the trigger. Jack closed his eyes, trapped between the bullet that was about to be fired and the temporal explosion that was about to unmake the world. The last thing he felt was a profound, peaceful sense of stillness as the universe dissolved into white. There was no sound, no impact, no pain. The white light was not a thing to be seen, but a state to be in. It was absolute, washing away the shrieking machine, the advancing killer, the very concept of the room around him. It was a moment of perfect, terrifying peace. And then, as gently as it had arrived, it receded. Jack opened his eyes. He was on the floor of the alcove, the side of his face pressed against the cool, smooth tiles. A profound silence had fallen, broken only by a faint, high-pitched ringing in his ears and the slow, steady beat of his own heart. The air was thick with the metallic tang of ozone, the smell of a lightning strike in a sealed room. He pushed himself up, his body aching as if he'd been in a car crash. He peered out into the lab, and the sight made him freeze. The chaos was gone. The violent, temporal storm had passed, leaving behind a scene of eerie, unnatural stillness. The emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows across the room. In the center, the Chimera device was a dead thing. It was no longer a beautiful, complex machine, but a blackened, skeletal husk, its crystalline components cracked and milky, its intricate wiring fused into molten slag. It looked like an ancient relic, unearthed after 1,000 years. Then he saw the bodies. Mr. Pierce was still there, 10 feet from the alcove, his arm outstretched, pistol aimed. But he was not made of flesh and blood anymore. He was a statue of gray, brittle-looking material, like old limestone, frozen in his final, violent act. The temporal blast hadn't killed him with force, but with time, aging him 1,000,000 years in a single instant. The two tactical operators had suffered a different, but equally horrific fate. They were slumped against the far wall, their forms intact, but their state-of-the-art gear was covered in a century's worth of thick, undisturbed dust. Their masks were clouded, their weapons rusted solid. They were modern mummies, entombed in the blink of an eye. A wave of nausea and vertigo washed over Jack. He had survived. But why? He stumbled back to Elena's console, the source of it all. The old CRT monitor was dark, the green glow of the failsafe gone. But it was not completely dead. Etched into the dark phosphor of the screen, as if by a ghostly finger, were two final, faint words. "Thank you." He understood. In the final explosive moment of the overload, Elena, her consciousness focused and briefly all-powerful, had done one last thing. She had been the eye of the storm, and she had shielded him from its passage. She hadn't just sent a warning, she had, in the end, become his savior. With a trembling hand, Jack reached out and touched the screen, a silent farewell to the ghost in the machine. The distant, muffled clang of an alarm bell shook him from his reverie. The rest of the building was stirring. He had to get out. He couldn't go out the way Pierce had come in. The corridor would be the first place they searched. He retreated back into the maintenance tunnel, pulling the damaged lab door as shut as it would go. The building was in chaos. He could hear panicked, confused voices echoing through the ventilation system. Men were shouting about a massive seismic event and a level 10 electromagnetic pulse that had fried every system below sub-level 3. They were trying to explain an event outside the bounds of their science, forcing a temporal cataclysm into the neat boxes of earthquakes and power surges. No one was looking for a lone analyst. They were trying to save their facility from what they thought was a natural disaster. This was his cover. He moved through the building's hidden passages, a phantom in the midst of the confusion. The security teams were all focused on the lower levels, rushing towards the source of the chaos. Jack went up. He moved with a confidence he hadn't possessed a day ago, his fear replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. He emerged from the ventilation grate on the surface into the pre-dawn chill, the sky just beginning to bleed from black to a soft, bruised purple. He walked away from the ethyl-red building without looking back. The air of the city, humid and tasting of exhaust fumes, had never felt so clean. He was free. He had won. He walked for an hour, aimlessly, just putting one foot in front of the other, watching the city slowly come to life around him. He stopped at a street corner, watching a vendor unlock his newspaper stand and stack the morning papers. The headlines screamed in thick, black letters, "Mystery tremor shakes downtown core, and no casualties reported." He felt a grim sense of satisfaction. It was over, and no one would ever know the truth. Then his eyes drifted to the top of the newspaper, to the date. His blood ran cold, a more profound and personal chill than any he had felt in the lab. It wasn't the morning after his infiltration. It was 3 days later. He frantically pulled out his burner phone, its battery almost dead. He powered it on. The screen lit up, displaying the same impossible information. He had walked into the ethyl-red building late on a Tuesday night. It was now Saturday morning. The overload hadn't just thrown him to the floor. It had thrown him forward in time, neatly excising more than 2 full days from his existence. He stood on the street corner as the city bustled around him, a man out of time. What had happened in those missing 48 hours? Was Aris still alive? Had Croft been arrested, or had he used the chaos to disappear? The anomaly he had set out to stop was over, but a new one had just begun, and its subject was him. The world, which had just been handed back to him, tilted violently on its axis. 2 days. An entire 48-hour chasm had been carved out of his life without his knowledge or consent. He stood on the sidewalk, the Saturday morning commuters flowing around him like a river around a stone, the newspaper in his hand feeling heavier than lead. The implications were staggering. He wasn't just a man who had survived an explosion. He was a piece of driftwood on the currents of time. Panic, a familiar but unwelcome guest, began to claw at him. He forced it down. Panic was a luxury he couldn't afford. He needed shelter. He needed information. He needed to understand the world he had woken up in. He walked until his feet ached, putting as much distance as he could between himself and the ethyl-red building, a modern-day Babel whose fall he had both caused and witnessed. On the far side of the city, in a neighborhood of pawn shops and laundromats, he found another cheap, cash-only motel and bought himself 2 nights of anonymity. After securing the room, he made his way to the one place that felt like a sanctuary, a public library. Surrounded by the quiet rustle of pages and the hushed reverence for knowledge, he sat down at a public computer terminal and began the task of excavating his own lost history. He started with the news archives from Wednesday morning, the day everything should have ended. The ethyl-red incident was the top story, both locally and nationally. The official narrative had been constructed with swift, corporate efficiency. There was no mention of a secret lab or temporal physics. The official story was a catastrophic failure of an experimental flywheel-based uninterruptible power supply located in the facility's sublevels. The seismic event was attributed to the massive kinetic energy released by the device's failure. It was a masterful piece of fiction, technical enough to sound plausible and mundane enough to discourage further questions. Ethyl-red's stock had plunged. Federal investigators from the Department of Energy had been called in to lead the inquiry. The facility was on a complete lockdown. He found a video of a press conference held on Thursday afternoon. A grim-faced Silas Croft stood at a podium, his expression a perfect mask of regret and resolve. He spoke of the company's deepest sympathies for the disruption caused, and promised full transparency and cooperation with the authorities. Watching him lie so calmly to the entire world, Jack felt a profound hatred, cold and pure. Croft hadn't been arrested. He hadn't vanished. He was still in control, shaping the narrative, burying the truth under a mountain of corporate doublespeak. With a knot of dread in his stomach, Jack typed his own name into the search bar. His driver's license photo, grainy and unflattering, stared back at him from half a dozen articles. Jack Carter, the reports read, a nocturnal oversight analyst for the facility, is being sought by authorities as a person of interest. Sources say Carter was seen on internal security footage acting erratically near the site of the malfunction shortly before the incident. He has been missing since Tuesday night. They had found their scapegoat. He was officially a fugitive, the designated villain in Croft's carefully crafted story. His last, most desperate search was for Dr. Aris Thorne. He typed her name, his hands shaking slightly. The result was a chilling, absolute void. There were no articles about her being arrested. No mention of her as a missing person. No connection made to the Ethelred incident. In the eyes of the world, she didn't exist. It was the worst possible outcome, because it told him nothing. She could have escaped. She could be in a dark room somewhere, another one of Croft's contained assets. She could be dead. He was alone. No, that wasn't true. There was one other person who knew a piece of the truth. Leo. Contacting him was a terrible risk, an act of selfish desperation that could pull his friend back into the fire. But the thought of Aris, lost and alone, pushed him over the edge. He had to know if he was the only one left fighting. From the library's terminal, using the last of his burner phone's credit for a Wi-Fi hotspot, he sent a message to Leo on their secure channel. It was short, a single flare sent up into the darkness. "You okay?" He returned to the bleak motel room, the four walls feeling like a prison cell. The waiting was a unique form of torture. Every passing car, every footstep in the hall outside, was a potential threat. He was a ghost, and the whole world was now hunting him. Hours crawled by. He was about to give up hope when the burner phone, plugged into the wall and charging, buzzed once. It was Leo's reply. The message was encrypted, but its content was stark and terrifying. "They came. Feds. 2 days ago. Black suits, no sense of humor. They had your picture. Asked about you, about the audio file you sent me. I told them you were a paranoid burnout, and the file was probably a prank. I don't think they bought it. They're watching me, Jack. My accounts, my devices, everything." A second message appeared immediately after. "Don't contact me again. It's not safe." They asked about Chimera, but they also asked about something else. A different name. Project Nightingale. I've never heard of it. "I'm sorry, Jack. Burn this phone. Good luck." Before Jack could even process the words, the messages vanished from the screen, remotely deleted. He stared at the blank phone, his mind reeling. They had gone to Leo. The investigation was real, and it was closing in on the truth. But it was the last part that truly terrified him. A new name. A new secret. The story wasn't over. The monster he thought he had slain had other heads, other names. And Project Nightingale was one of them. The two words hung in the silence of the cheap motel room, an afterimage burned into Jack's mind. Project Nightingale. The name felt softer, more delicate than the monstrous mythological Chimera, but somehow more sinister for it. Chimera was a beast, a thing of brute force and temporal violence. A nightingale was a singer, its power in its voice, its influence subtle and pervasive. Jack crushed the burner phone in his hand, the plastic groaning in protest. Leo's warning was clear. The hunt wasn't over, it had just changed shape. Hiding was no longer a viable strategy. It was a slow death, waiting in a series of drab, anonymous rooms for the inevitable knock on the door. He was a loose end, and men like Silas Croft did not tolerate loose ends. His only chance at survival, his only chance of ever finding out what happened to Aris, was to go on the offensive. He had to stop chasing the past and start hunting the future. He had to find out what Project Nightingale was. After destroying the phone and scrubbing his meager belongings of any connection to his old life, he made his way back to the now familiar sanctuary of the public library. His resources were dwindling, but his resolve had hardened into a sharp, dangerous point. He couldn't search for the project directly. That would be like shouting its name in a crowded room, and he knew who was listening. He had to come at it sideways. He had to look for the people. He spent the next 8 hours engaged in a painstaking act of digital archaeology. He focused on the period Aris Thorne had worked at Ethelred, meticulously combing through archived press releases, lists of patent filings, and the proceedings from obscure tech conferences. He wasn't looking for a single name, but for a constellation of them, building a map of the social and professional network of the Advanced Research Division. He was looking for another ghost, another person who, like Aris, had disappeared. Many of the names he found were still high-profile players at Ethelred, loyalists in Croft's inner circle. Others had moved on to prestigious roles at rival corporations. But one name stood out for its strange trajectory. Dr. Alistair Finch. Finch was a bioinformaticist, a specialist in the intersection of biological systems and data processing. Jack found one academic paper he had co-authored with Aris Thorne early in her tenure, a dense, theoretical piece on predictive modeling in complex, nonlinear biological systems. According to his digital footprint, Finch was considered a rising star. Then, about a year after Aris vanished, he too had left Ethelred. The official reason, stated in a brief corporate newsletter, was a desire to return to the more fulfilling world of academia. Jack dug deeper, and the story grew stranger. This return to academia was not a prestigious, tenured position at a major university. Dr. Alistair Finch, the former Ethelred prodigy, was now listed as an adjunct professor teaching 2 introductory data science courses at Northgate Community College, a struggling institution located in a rundown industrial park on the other side of the city. It was the career equivalent of a concert pianist choosing to play in a subway station. It wasn't a career change, it was an act of self-imposed exile. Finch wasn't just hiding from Ethelred, he was hiding from his own ambition. Jack knew he had found his next lead. He spent the last of his cash on a bus pass and a few items from a thrift store, a worn baseball cap, a faded university sweatshirt, and a pair of thick-rimmed glasses with clear plastic lenses. It was a flimsy disguise, but it would have to do. He spent the afternoon at the Northgate campus, a collection of bleak, concrete buildings that radiated a sense of quiet desperation. From the back of a nearly empty lecture hall, he watched Dr. Finch teach. He was a thin, bird-like man in his late 40s, with a nervous energy that never seemed to dissipate. His clothes were rumpled, his hair was unkempt, and he had a habit of constantly glancing towards the door, as if expecting the sudden arrival of bad news. He was a brilliant man playing the part of a mediocre one, and he was doing a terrible job of it. After his last class, Jack followed him from a safe distance. Finch didn't go home. Instead, he walked to a small, quiet coffee shop a few blocks from the campus. He took a small table in the corner, ordered a black coffee, and began grading papers, his shoulders hunched as if against a cold wind. He looked like a man trying to make himself as small and unnoticeable as possible. Jack stood across the street, watching the professor through the large plate glass window. This was his chance. Finch was the weak link in the chain, the man who had run away but hadn't been able to run far enough. He held a piece of the puzzle, Jack was sure of it. The question was how to get it from him without causing the man to shatter completely. He took a deep breath, pulling the brim of his cap down low. He was no longer just Jack Carter, the analyst, or Jack Carter, the fugitive. He was an agent of consequence, the living echo of a project that had broken the world. He pushed open the door to the coffee shop, the small bell above it chiming his arrival, and stepped inside, ready to confront the next ghost of Project Chimera. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed, a small, cheerful sound that was utterly at odds with the tension coiling in Jack's stomach. He ordered a black coffee he didn't want, his movements slow and deliberate. He took a seat at a small table adjacent to Dr. Finch, close enough to speak without raising his voice, but not so close as to seem overtly threatening. For several minutes, he just sat, letting the ambient noise of the cafe provide cover, watching the nervous professor scribble notes in the margins of a student's paper. The man was a tightly wound spring, and Jack knew that the wrong word, the wrong approach, would cause him to snap. He waited until the barista was occupied with the espresso machine, its loud hiss providing a momentary blanket of sound. He leaned slightly towards Finch's table. "Professor Finch," he said, his voice low and steady. "My name doesn't matter. I need to ask you about Elena Vance." The effect of the name was instantaneous and electric. Finch's head shot up, his eyes wide with a terror so profound it seemed to steal the air from his lungs. The red pen dropped from his hand, rolling across the table. His face, already pale, turned a ghostly white. He fumbled with his stack of papers, shoving them haphazardly into a worn leather satchel. His only instinct was to flee. He pushed his chair back, ready to bolt for the door. Jack spoke again, his voice urgent but calm, a lifeline in the man's sudden panic. "Wait, please. I'm not with them. I'm not with Ethelred." He leaned in closer. "My name is Jack Carter. I'm the man they're blaming for the power plant incident on Tuesday night. I was at her console. I saw her message." This stopped Finch cold. He sank back into his chair, his body trembling. He stared at Jack, his gaze a mixture of fear and a dawning, desperate hope. He looked around the coffee shop, at the oblivious students and the cheerful barista. "Not here," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He gathered his things with shaking hands and stood up. "My car. In the parking lot. We can talk there." The car was a beat-up, decade-old sedan that matched the man's defeated persona. Inside, with the doors locked, the story of Project Nightingale finally came pouring out of Dr. Alistair Finch, a torrent of guilt and suppressed horror. Nightingale wasn't a separate project, he began, staring through the grimy windshield at the concrete wall of the building opposite. It was the payload. Chimera was the gun. Nightingale was the bullet. My bullet. He explained that his specialty, bioinformatics, was the key. Project Chimera could open a bridge through time, but Silas Croft's ambition went far beyond stock market predictions. He wanted to cure death itself. Project Nightingale was an attempt at retrocausal gene therapy. The concept was elegant, Finch said, a flicker of his old scientific pride mixing with his self-loathing. We could scan a subject's genome, and Chimera could retrieve data from their future, looking for the telltale markers of late-onset diseases. Cancer, Alzheimer's, genetic heart conditions. Then I would design a bespoke, benign virus, a delivery agent. Nightingale. We would transmit it back through the temporal bridge to the subject in the present. The virus would find the flawed gene and rewrite it, correcting the error before the disease ever had a chance to manifest. We weren't just curing disease, we were erasing it from a person's timeline. Elena Vance, Jack said, the name hanging in the air. She was the test subject. Finch flinched, a fresh wave of pain washing over his face. She was subject 0. She had a minor, dormant genetic marker for a neurological disorder, something that had a small chance of manifesting in her old age. It was supposed to be the perfect proof of concept. Simple, clean. His voice broke. But the temporal bridge wasn't clean. It introduced noise. A paradox. The viral agent we sent back was corrupted by its own journey. It didn't just fix the one gene. It created a cascade failure. It began rewriting her entire genetic code, randomly, chaotically. He turned to look at Jack, his eyes filled with a terrifying understanding. The power surge, the feedback loop that tore her apart, it wasn't an electrical failure. It was a biological one. Her own body, warring with its past and future self, created a biological paradox so extreme that it collapsed the localized laws of physics. We didn't just kill her, Mr. Carter. We turned her into the weapon that destroyed the entire project. The pieces clicked into place for Jack. Croft's obsession with the anchor, the new hardware installation. He's trying to do it again, Jack said. He never stopped, Finch confirmed, his voice a dead whisper. He sees Elena's death not as a tragedy, but as a data point. A problem to be solved. He's building Chimera 2.0 to be more stable, more powerful, so he can perfect Nightingale. He's not trying to cure disease anymore. He's trying to play God, with the ability to rewrite any person's biology, at any point in their life, without their knowledge. It's the most terrifying weapon ever conceived. Finch looked like a broken man, defeated by the weight of his own creation. But there was one last thing. I ran. I couldn't be a part of it. But Aris fought. She knew what Croft was capable of. She was building her own safeguards, her own backdoors into the Nightingale code itself. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a note, written in his own shaking hand. Just before she disappeared, I got one last, encrypted message from her. A contingency. She knew they were coming for her. He looked at Jack, his eyes pleading. She said if the worst ever happened, everything she had, all her research notes, her failsafe code, her last hope, was hidden at the Orchid House. I don't know what it is. A server name, a dead drop, a real place. It's all I have left to give you. Finch pushed the note into Jack's hand. Please, he begged. She was trying to stop him. You have to find it. You have to finish what she started. Jack looked at the two words on the paper, the Orchid House. A cryptic clue. A new destination. It was the only path forward on a map that was getting darker and more terrifying with every step. Jack left Dr. Finch sitting in his beat-up car, a man hollowed out by his own genius. As Jack walked away, he didn't feel triumph, only a deep, chilling sorrow and the grim weight of the two words scribbled on the piece of paper in his hand, the Orchid House. The name was a fragile, elegant key to a world of unimaginable horror. Finch had given him the what, now he had to find the where. His first stop was, once again, the public library. The anonymous computer terminal had become his only window into a world where he no longer officially existed. He began with the most logical and straightforward interpretation of the clue. He ran a series of searches for businesses, landmarks, or properties named the Orchid House within the city and its surrounding counties. The results were frustratingly mundane. There was a high-end flower shop downtown, a quaint tea house in a historic district, and a small bed and breakfast 2 towns over. 4 hours, he fell down a rabbit hole of public records, trying to link Aris Thorne to any of these locations. He cross-referenced property deeds, old residency records, and business licenses. He found nothing. No connection. Aris was a woman who covered her tracks with meticulous precision. It felt like another dead end, another breadcrumb trail leading off a cliff. He leaned back, rubbing his tired, gritty eyes. He was thinking like Jack Carter, the data analyst, the man who looked for straight lines and logical connections. He needed to think like Dr. Aris Thorne, the theoretical physicist who saw the universe as a poem, the woman who named her blog Cassandra_Echo. The name wasn't a simple address label. It was a riddle. What was so important about an orchid? On an intuitive leap, he navigated back to the university archives and found her old, single-post blog. He had read it before to find her username, but now he read it again, this time for its meaning. It was a dense, beautiful piece of writing, drawing parallels between the persistence of cosmic background radiation and the way an echo lingers in nature. This time, a specific phrase, one he had previously dismissed as poetic flourish, jumped out at him. And so the echo persists, a memory of a thing that has passed. It is the universe's ghost. It is seen in nature, in the strange and wonderful Dendrophylax lindinii, a flower with no leaves, a phantom bloom that seems to float in the humid air, a perfect, living echo of what a flower should be. Jack didn't know the scientific name. He highlighted it, copied it, and pasted it into a new search. The results loaded, and a chill traced its way down his spine. Dendrophylax lindinii. Common name, the ghost orchid. It was an impossibly rare, famously difficult to cultivate flower, known for its ethereal, leafless appearance. A ghost. An echo. Of course. It was perfect. Aris hadn't just chosen any orchid. She had chosen the one that perfectly encapsulated the themes of her own doomed work. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his heart pounding with renewed hope. He searched for Ghost Orchid and the name of the city. There was only one significant result. The Blackwood Botanical Conservatory. It was a historic institution on the city's greenbelt, founded in the Victorian era. Once a jewel of municipal culture, it had, according to recent articles, fallen on hard times, struggling with budget cuts and dwindling attendance. But its one remaining claim to fame, the thing that still drew botanists from around the world, was its world-renowned collection of rare and endangered orchids, housed in a specially designed, climate-controlled greenhouse. A greenhouse known colloquially to staff and visitors for over a century as the Orchid House. And the centerpiece of its collection, its most prized and delicate possession, was a thriving colony of ghost orchids. He had found it. A real, physical place. Aris had hidden her last secret not in the cold, sterile world of data servers, but in a living sanctuary of breathtaking fragility and beauty. He spent the rest of the afternoon studying satellite maps of the conservatory, reading articles about its layout, and even watching old visitor videos to get a sense of its security. It was nothing like Ethelred. There were simple motion sensors, a night watchman who made his rounds on the hour, and an old wrought iron fence around the perimeter. It was vulnerable. As night fell, Jack took a series of buses to the edge of the city. He walked the last mile, the suburban streets growing quiet, the air growing cool and damp. And then he saw it. The Blackwood Botanical Conservatory was a colossal structure of glass and iron, a cathedral from another age. Its dozens of domed roofs and intricate ironwork were silhouetted against the starry sky, beautiful and haunting. The entire structure was dark, save for a few dim security lights that cast long, skeletal shadows across the manicured lawns. He stood across the street, hidden in the shadows of an old oak tree, and watched. He had found Aris's sanctuary. But sanctuaries were also fortresses. He didn't know if he would find a hidden laptop, a physical document, or something far stranger inside. He didn't know if this was Aris's last will and testament, or an elaborate trap. All he knew was that he had to get inside. He checked his watch, waiting for the precise midpoint between the night watchman's patrols, and prepared to breach the walls of the last quiet place on Earth. The night watchman's patrol was a slow, predictable circuit, a lazy river of habit. Jack waited until the beam of the man's flashlight had swept past and vanished behind the dense foliage of the tropical house. He had identified his entry point, a tall, arched window on the shadowed side of the fern house, its iron latch corroded by decades of unrelenting humidity. It was a relic of a less security-conscious era. Using the pliers of his multi-tool for leverage and applying slow, steady pressure, he worked the latch back and forth. For a long, agonizing minute, it refused to budge, and then, with a soft, grating sound, it gave way. He slid the window open just enough to squeeze through and dropped silently onto the damp, mossy flagstones inside. He was immediately enveloped by a wall of warm, humid air, thick with the smell of damp earth, decaying leaves, and the sweet, heavy perfume of unseen blossoms. It was like stepping into another world, a primal jungle sleeping under a vast, star-dusted canopy of glass. Moonlight filtered through the panes, painting the strange, alien shapes of massive ferns and broad-leafed plants in shades of silver and black. His only guide was a faded map of the conservatory he had memorized from their website. He moved cautiously along the winding stone paths, every rustle of a leaf, every drip of water from the overhead irrigation system, amplifying the frantic beat of his own heart. He was halfway across the main dome when he heard it, a faint, off-key whistling. He froze, melting back into the deep shadows of a colossal tree fern. A moment later, a bright, roving beam of light cut through the fronds of the adjacent greenhouse. The night watchman was off his schedule, making an early round. Jack held his breath, motionless, as the beam painted the leaves just inches from his face before moving on, the whistling slowly fading into the distance. The close call sharpened his senses. He moved faster now, finally finding the small, discreet sign for the Ghost Orchid Pavilion. It was a smaller, self-contained greenhouse, a glass box within the larger glass cathedral, the air inside visibly shimmering with heat and moisture. He slipped through the unlocked door. Inside, it was a pocket of the Florida Everglades. The humidity was nearly absolute, and the air was still and silent. And there, hanging in the gloom as if suspended by magic, were the ghost orchids. They were breathtaking, just as Aris had described, spectral, leafless white blooms that seemed to float in space, their roots clinging to the bark of the trees they were mounted on. It was a place of profound and fragile beauty, the perfect sanctuary for a secret. But where was it? He began a meticulous, frantic search. He checked under the wooden benches, behind the irrigation pipes, inside the empty terracotta pots. He even pried open a small maintenance panel for the climate control system. He found nothing but wiring and dust. Despair began to creep in. Had he been wrong? Had Finch sent him on a wild goose chase based on the ramblings of a woman who was already gone? He stood before the central display, a carefully arranged collection of the finest ghost orchid specimens. Defeated, he began to read the small, engraved brass placards at the base of each plant, a last, desperate act. Dendrophylax lindinii, specimen A, Dendrophylax lindinii, specimen B. Then he saw it. The last placard in the row was different. Dendrophylax lindinii, bioengineered variant. Accession hashtag, ATCE, 481-516-2342. His breath hitched. AT Aris Thorne. CE Cassandra's Echo. And the numbers. It wasn't a location, it was an object. This specific, living plant was the key. Aris hadn't just hidden a file in the orchid house, she had hidden it in an orchid. The concept was so brilliant, so audacious, it took his breath away. She had used a modified, benign version of the Nightingale technology to encode her data into the very DNA of a flower. His eyes scanned the intricate support structure and irrigation system beneath this specific plant. Tucked away, almost perfectly camouflaged among the tubes and wires, was a small, waterproof pelican case. He pried it from its hiding spot. Inside, nestled in black protective foam, was a sleek, handheld device. It had a small LCD screen and a single, retractable data needle on a thin cable. A biosequential data reader. Aris had left not just the lock, but the key to open it. He found the corresponding data port, a small, rubber-sealed jack on the plant's custom irrigation block. He connected the device. The small screen flickered to life, bathing his face in a cool blue light. Cassandra Echo Protocol, standing by. Please authenticate. A keypad appeared on the screen. He carefully typed in the numbers. The device beeped softly. Key accepted. Welcome, Dr. Thorne. Accessing biosequential data. Decrypting file, Nightingale's Lullaby. A progress bar appeared, and the slow process of downloading the genetic data began. He watched, mesmerized, as the percentage crawled upwards. Nightingale's Lullaby. A failsafe. A cure. A song to put a monster to sleep. The bar hit 20%. He was so focused on the screen he didn't hear the footsteps until it was too late. Hey, who's in there? The voice was sharp, loud, and right outside the pavilion door. A powerful flashlight beam flooded the small glass house, pinning Jack in its glare like a terrified animal. He looked up to see the silhouetted figure of the night watchman, his hand already raising a radio to his mouth. He was trapped, bathed in the incriminating blue light of the data reader, the download not even a quarter of the way complete. The flashlight beam was a physical thing, pinning Jack in place. The watchman's voice, amplified by the glass walls of the pavilion, was the sound of his entire mission coming to a crashing halt. Stay right there. I'm calling this in. The man fumbled for his radio, his eyes never leaving Jack. Panic gave way to a cold, razor-sharp clarity. There was no escape. Not yet. The download bar on the bioreader was at a maddeningly slow 35%. Running was not an option. Fighting was impossible. That left diversion. Jack's eyes darted around the small, humid space, his analyst's mind cataloging his environment not as a sanctuary of plants, but as a system with inputs and overrides. He saw it on the far wall, a bright red, glass-fronted box. The emergency manual override for the pavilion's high-pressure misting system. A last resort to save the hypersensitive orchids from a catastrophic drop in humidity. "Don't be a fool, son," the watchman warned, his radio now at his lips. "Just give up." Jack didn't answer. He lunged. Not at the guard, but at the wall. He slammed the heel of his hand into the glass cover of the emergency box. It shattered with a sharp crack. He thrust his hand inside and yanked down the large, red lever. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, the world dissolved into a torrential roar. Dozens of high-pressure nozzles in the ceiling erupted simultaneously, blasting the small pavilion with a dense, atomized fog. The effect was instantaneous. Visibility dropped to 0. It was like being inside a cloud. The watchman yelled in surprise, a choked, sputtering sound. His flashlight beam, once a piercing spear, became a useless, diffuse glow in the swirling mist. A deafeningly loud alarm began to blare throughout the entire conservatory. Jack dropped to the floor, shielding the bioreader with his body, his eyes glued to the progress bar. The mist was cold and disorienting, soaking him in seconds. 60%, 75%, 90%. He could hear the watchman coughing and stumbling around blindly on the other side of the pavilion. 100%. The screen flashed download complete. He yanked the data needle from the port, shoved the device into his jacket, and scrambled for the opposite door of the pavilion. He burst out into the main conservatory, the alarms shrieking, and ran. He didn't look back. He plunged into the dark, labyrinthine paths of the glass jungle, leaving behind a scene of total chaos for the authorities who were surely now on their way. He made it out the same way he came in, a ghost slipping out of a madhouse. The sound of approaching sirens spurred him on. He was back on the streets, a soaked, shivering fugitive with the world's last hope zipped in his pocket. He couldn't go back to the motel. He couldn't go to the library. He needed a secure place with powerful computing resources to even begin to understand the data he now possessed. A desperate, insane gamble formed in his mind. There was only one place that fit the description. A place that was compromised, watched, and certainly on a list for regular police check-ins. But it was also a place they might not expect him to be stupid enough to return to. His own apartment. The journey was a blur of back alleys and nervous, watchful progress. The pre-dawn light was beginning to stain the eastern sky as he reached his building. It was quiet. No black sedans. No obvious surveillance. He slipped inside, his stolen key turning in the lock. The apartment was just as he'd left it, cold, musty, and silent. A thin layer of dust covered every surface. He was a ghost haunting the ruins of his own life. He double-bolted the door and went straight to his custom-built computer rig. He worked quickly, making sure the machine was physically disconnected from the internet before he powered it on. He plugged in the bioreader. The device was recognized instantly. A single, encrypted file appeared on his screen, nightingales_lullaby.bioarc. Using the device itself as a decryption key, he opened it. It wasn't a simple program. It was a sprawling, elegant, impossibly complex piece of code. It was a work of art. As he scrolled through the annotated data, he began to understand its genius. It wasn't a weapon designed to destroy the Chimera hardware. It was a counteragent. A lullaby. It was a benign, self-replicating string of synthetic DNA designed to be uploaded and transmitted by the Nightingale system itself. But instead of rewriting a person's genes, it would rewrite the Nightingale virus, rendering it inert. More than that, it would embed a permanent, incorruptible signature into the target's timeline, a proof of existence that would make any future attempts at retrocausal biological tampering impossible. It didn't just break the weapon, it inoculated the very fabric of time against it. But this beautiful, elegant solution came with a horrifying, crushing realization. To deploy it, he couldn't destroy Croft's machine. He had to use it. He had to break back into the new heavily fortified Lab 3, access Croft's perfected Chimera 2.0, and use that monstrous engine to send Aris's cure into the past. The irony was so profound it felt like a physical blow. His mind reeled, trying to process the impossibility of his new mission. How could he possibly get back in? Frantically, he searched the downloaded files for instructions, a manual, anything. He found a secondary file, hidden deep in the code's appendix. It was a simple text log, titled a_confession.log. He clicked it. The words of Aris Thorne, stored for years in the heart of a flower, filled his screen. Jack, if you're reading this, then I have failed, and the world is in more danger than you can imagine. But to understand how to stop Croft, you first have to understand why this all began. You have to understand what I did to Elena. The cursor blinked, waiting. Jack leaned closer, his heart pounding, as he prepared to read the final secret of the ghost in the machine. Jack leaned closer to the screen, the world outside his dusty apartment disappearing completely. There was only the cool glow of the monitor and the silent, waiting words of a woman who was likely already dead. He scrolled down, and Aris Thorne's confession began. It was not a technical document, but a story, a tragedy of love, ambition, and the terrible price of reaching for the impossible. Elena and I were more than colleagues, the log began. We were partners in everything. Chimera was our shared dream, born from late-night scribbling equations on napkins. We saw it as a way to listen to the universe's echoes, to understand the shape of time. It was beautiful, pure. Silas Croft saw it as a product, a weapon. He was the one who secured the funding, and he never let us forget that he owned our dream. But we had another dream, one we kept hidden from the sterile, corporate world of Ethelred. We wanted a family. Using techniques far beyond what was sanctioned, we were trying to create a child, combining our DNA in a way that had never been done before. We were scientists, but this was an act of love. And it was in this private, secret work that we made a mistake. The dormant genetic marker in Elena wasn't natural. It was an anomaly, a tiny, unforeseen flaw that resulted from our process. It was harmless, but to us, it was a failure in the perfect future we were trying to build. We became obsessed with correcting it. When Croft began pushing for a practical application for Chimera, I made the most catastrophic mistake of my life. I suggested we could use the bridge to fix our error. I proposed the core concept of Nightingale, not to cure the world, but as a secret, selfish attempt to perfect our own child. Croft found my research. He saw the potential not just to correct a single gene, but to rewrite any gene. He transformed our personal hope into a monstrous weapon. The final experiment, it wasn't for Ethelred. It was for us. Under immense pressure from Croft, we used the machine to try and erase our mistake. And in doing so, I sent the woman I loved into the very storm we had created. Her death is my fault. I designed the theory that became her cage. The raw, unvarnished guilt in the words was a physical weight. Jack felt a profound sense of sorrow for these two women, brilliant pioneers whose love story had been twisted into a sci-fi horror. He read on, the confession now shifting from the past to the future, from Aris's guilt to Jack's mission. But my guilt is not a weapon, Jack. Knowledge is. You cannot defeat Silas Croft by destroying his machine. You must understand the man himself. His ambition isn't just for power or money. It is far more desperate. Silas is dying. He has a rare, degenerative genetic disorder that his family has passed down for generations. It's a ticking clock, and his time is almost up. Project Nightingale was never just a corporate venture. It is his frantic, personal quest for a cure. He wants to use it on himself, to reach back into his own timeline and erase the flaw that is killing him. He doesn't see Elena as a failed experiment. He sees her as a proof of concept. He is the true subject zero. This obsession is his weakness. He has built himself a private backdoor into the system. In his penthouse office, at the very top of the Ethelred Tower, is a custom-built executive terminal. It has the highest level of priority access, capable of overriding all other commands, and it's tied directly into his personal biomonitors. He plans to sit in that chair and watch as his creation saves him. He believes it is his sanctum. But I helped design the original network architecture. I know where the seams are. The terminal's network address is 10.1.1.1. The override command is not a simple password, but a genetic key sequence. His own. I have attached the file. His obsession will be his undoing. This is my last echo, Jack. Nightingale's lullaby is the only way to undo the damage we have done. You must use his own terminal, his own desperate hope, against him. Upload the lullaby. Don't let our legacy be this weapon. Let it be a warning. Give Elena peace. Erase it all. The log file ended. Jack sat back, the magnitude of the revelations washing over him. He now had it all, the failsafe, the motive, and the key to the villain's throne room. He stood up and walked to his apartment window. The sun was rising, setting the glass and steel of the city skyline ablaze. In the distance, the Ethelred Tower stood tallest, a dark spire against the morning light. His path, which had been a chaotic scramble through basements and back alleys, was now terrifyingly clear. It led straight up. He was no longer running from the tower. He was going to it. He had to get to the top floor, to confront a dying man playing God, and use the secrets of two brilliant women to finally put the ghosts of the past to rest. His gaze fixed on the pinnacle of the tower, and for the first time in a long time, he did not feel fear. He felt the cold, hard certainty of purpose.